episode of Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
Massive breaking news in the world of true crime tonight. Bryan Kohberger, the accused killer in the murder of the 4 University of Idaho students back in 2020, November 13th to be precise, has taken a plea deal and says that he will now serve life in prison without the possibility of parole in exchange for not potentially having his life taken from him. It was a death penalty case. Judge Hippler just gave a very slight continuance, a matter of days. Jury selection was set to start August 4th with testimony beginning August 18th. Today, it is June 30th, the last day of June. We've been going through these windy roads since November of 2022. We had an entire show set for you tonight on Bryan Kohberger about his friends of the victims speaking out about some hearing today where acquaintances of Bryan Kohberger said, why do I have to go to Idaho to testify? And now all of that seems null and void. Welcome to Surviving Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime, and we're on it when breaking news happens. We're covering from 4 a.m. Bed night last night after a shooting of firefighters in Idaho. Let's get right into this right now. Erin is an attorney in Pocatello, Idaho, joining us. We got Sky Lazar out of Utah, Tara Malik, an Idaho-based attorney as well, Josh Ritter, former prosecutor of the year and host of Courtroom Confidential. Josh Ritter, let me start with you. I'll work our way backwards. When did you learn of this news? It happened in just the last few minutes, and I've got to say, in the news world, we give credit where credit is due. The story broken by News Nation. Brian Enton, one of the premier true crime reporters in the country, he tweeted it out as well. So kudos to News Nation on this massive, massive scoop. But just about every media entity, not just here in America, but worldwide, was preparing to go out to Boise, including myself and Josh Ritter. And I was looking forward to meeting Tara Malik. And now it looks like there's no trial. Ritter, you are looking sharp as always. New set there. Tell us when you learned of this and your initial reaction.
I learned of it 46 minutes ago, and I know that because I'm looking at Brian Enton's tweet right now. And the reason I heard about it is my wife gasped from the other room, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I can't believe this." He was the first one to tweet, and when I went online to try to confirm it with anything else, I mean, there was literally no news, and then it started to roll in from different sources. So it sounds like it actually is happening. And I got to say, I really am shocked. I mean, it's not unheard of for these death penalty cases to settle. And usually when they do settle, they're in the form that we're starting to hear about now, where it's a way for the defendant to avoid the death penalty altogether, that if they plead to everything, they plead to life without parole, and they waive appeal, which is a huge deal, meaning this is a locked in plea. There's not going to be any issues down the road. There's not going to be any quarreling about where did the DNA come from and how did they get there. There's not going to be, years upon years of litigation about this whole thing. It will be done, and he will go to prison for the rest of his life. I am sure they must have had extensive conversations with the family members, because I know that they were very involved, especially, Steve Goncalves was very involved in all of this and wanted to see justice. But I'm shocked because I thought if there is any case, putting aside your thoughts about the death penalty, if there was any case where you felt like the greatest penalty we have in this country should apply, it would be in a case like this, where you've got innocent lives, young folks doing nothing wrong, no problems with this individual whatsoever, completely random, nightmarish crime, and all of this loss of life in a really horrific way as they slept to be stabbed to death. You would think that the death penalty would be reserved for a case like this, not to mention that Idaho's legislature goes about enacting this House Bill 37, which everyone thought was for the specific purpose of making sure that if they're going to give someone, aka Bryan Kohberger, the death penalty, that he actually would have a real chance of meeting his end at the hands of the government. When they allowed for aside from lethal injection, for it to be the firing squad. So I thought there's no way, the government can always make an offer, but I thought there's no way they're going to offer anything less than the death penalty on a case like this. So because of that, I'm shocked.
Yeah, I have to tell you, again, last night we got word of this horrific shooting in Idaho where 2 firefighters, one from Coeur d'Alene, and one from Kootenai County, which is where some of these victims are actually from in this story. 2 of these firefighters were killed. A third is basically clinging to life in somewhat decent condition. It's kind of odd because they say he's unstable, but clinging to life at the same time. And, it was surreal. The COE and I working into the very early hours of the morning. And then we were saying to ourselves, let's do a Kohberger show today because there's so much news with that. I'm going to get to that eventually. And then we're getting ready to start the show at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we get word that this just happened. And it is still, I have not processed this yet. The absolute most important people in this whole conversation, of course, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. Those are the absolute 4 most important people. Their lives were taken. I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what they are thinking. But we already know that the family is upset here. Aaron, I'm going to come to you on this. Kaylee's family, you see this comment, said that they're upset. The Goncalveses were very vocal about asking for the death penalty and wanting Bryan Kohberger eliminated from planet Earth if he was convicted and was convicted with the death penalty. They're never going to get that now. Aaron, just initially your thoughts about the family of the victims tonight.
Well, I think that it's problematic. I think that it sounds like they didn't follow the Idaho Victims Rights Act. They're supposed to be consulted. That's one of the most important things, is that you work with the victims of crime when you're offering plea deals, things like that. And so I'm shocked, frankly, that they did not talk to them about this. I worked on a double murder, and we met with the family and we had that entire conversation. And what's interesting is that was a double murder, but that family, they understood. They wanted closure. They wanted it behind them. And they were happy to give up the death penalty in the case that I worked on. So in this case, being that they really wanted the death penalty, they just should have been consulted. They should have been a part of this, and they should be the last people who are blindsided by a plea agreement.
Very well said. Sky, I just want you to pick up on that, and Tara next. Aaron said, you've got to be looking at the victims' rights here. The Goncalveses, it's true. Look at this. This is the Goncalves family page. Kudos to the COE behind the scenes. She works harder than any of us. Space Coast on the West Coast. Steve Cohen for getting all these guests on in a flash. If you're thinking you're going to find this on CNN or Fox, it ain't going to happen as quickly as we get it to you. It is true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all your love and support. I mean, Sky, again, this has been building since they got word back November 13th of 2022. We're now into July, essentially, of 2025, 3 years almost after the fact. And now the rug pulled out from under the feet of these victims' families. If I was them, I would be unable to post a thing. I would just be stewing, upset. And now it seems like there is no trial, and in their eyes, no justice. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised, one, that they made the offer. I mean, the judges ruled in the prosecution's favor at every turn. Just recently ruling that they couldn't pursue any alternative suspects, that they couldn't pursue an alibi, denying the continuance. I'm surprised by a plea this late, essentially this late in the game, when all things seem to be pointing in favor of the prosecution in this case. I do think from the defense side, they've been fighting to save his life. So as soon as you get a plea that takes death off the table in a case like this, I think especially in a state like Idaho, you definitely take it. I am surprised by the statement that the family at least one of them. I saw somebody commented that the other families, were pushing them to pursue a plea, that they weren't consulted. In any case, families of victims or alleged victims in cases have to be consulted under the Victim Rights Bill, which is similar to what we have here in Utah as well. So it's
Sky, real quick. So let's hypothetical. I mean, it sounds like the Goncalveses were completely blindsided. What if they don't consult the victims' families? Is there any kind of legal recourse for the Goncalves family now?
I mean, they may have. That's a good question. They may have some sort of civil recourse against them. They have the right to be heard before the judge. In terms of the plea, he'll probably ask them whether victims' families have been consulted and whether or not they support it. They can oppose it and be heard at the plea and at sentencing. And, I guess maybe the judge doesn't accept the plea as offered. Probably unlikely in a case like this. And quite frankly, I can understand their frustration. Probably they've been being told all along, we're gung ho after the death penalty. We're going to do this. And the problem is when prosecutors' offices do things like that, if something happens in a case that changes the posture of the case or puts you in a position as a prosecutor to offer a plea, you then have some really unhappy families, as we're seeing here. But they also have immunity, so it's probably not likely that anything real happens here.
Yeah, so there you have it. They have immunity. That's the key word. I mean, Tara Malik, let's just put in a hypothetical. Let's say you were representing the Goncalves family here. Again, the most important people in all of this are the 4 victims who are no longer with us. But let's say you were representing the Goncalves family. What would you be saying then to them tonight?
Well, I think, we can see what the emotional reaction is, which this was unexpected. It was unwelcome news. It was, I'm sure, devastating for them to hear. They've, from what we've all seen on the outside, have been very involved in this case. They have attended the court hearings. They have been following it very closely. They've hired their own advisors and agents to follow along with this case and see how it develops, and really have pushed and been vocal about pushing law enforcement, and I think the state as well, along the way to make sure that justice is served here. I looked at the Goncalves family page, and the statement says that it's true. We're beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They've failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. And what they don't say is, they're not saying that they weren't necessarily consulted, but it was unexpected. So we don't necessarily know whether they were told in advance or consulted and said, we're heading in this direction. We're going to be offering this plea deal. Here's why. The news could still be unexpected, right? So it's not necessarily, I'm not sure that we can tie those things together and say that they weren't informed in advance or they just heard about this. So, and we won't know until we get further down this road. But one of the things that they're going to have the ability to do, and Sky touched on it, which is at the change of plea hearing, the judge may ask them whether they're in agreement with this plea deal. At sentencing hearing, they are going to be allowed to make victim impact statements. And so they're still going to have an ability to be heard by this court, but certainly really surprising news here.
Yeah. Josh, the COE, informing me that you need to hop. But before you do you have 2 minutes or a minute to walk us? Let's pull back the curtain here. You're former LA prosecutor of the year. How does something like this go down? Does Ann Taylor say, I've had enough. I've been doing this since, right after the 7 weeks, once Bryan Kohberger was arrested, been working on it since that time. I don't think we have a strong enough case. I was rebuffed from being able to bring in an alternate suspect case, which she just was. And then she goes to Bill Thompson, the prosecutor, and says, no mas, like with Roberto Duran, and just waves a white flag? How does this all play out? Oh, we got to unmute yourself there, Josh.
I said, I think it was the other way around. I think that they probably were welcoming the idea of any kind of a non-death penalty plea for some time, at least telling the DA's office they would be open to something like that. And that it was probably the prosecutor's office who was saying, well, we'll think about it. We'll think about it as they continue to head to trial. I don't think this was the defense all of a sudden saying, okay, we've had enough. I think it was the prosecution finally saying, you know what, we've consulted with everyone involved. We've considered all the implications, putting people through all of this, the expense of the trial, the difficulty of putting on a trial, the possibilities the trials don't turn out how you expect, the possibilities of appeal, and everything having been said, this is probably the best result. I do agree to what was being said about the family being consulted. That statement doesn't necessarily mean that they may not have had any idea that this was in the works. I would still be shocked, though, if they didn't sit down for a long period of time telling them that, hey, we're thinking about this. This is what we're going to do. You are an important part in this whole decision. Now, I've had to make difficult decisions that the victims are not happy with, but because we've got other interests and we want to see justice done, and many times victims' families are very upset. But I would be absolutely floored if they were actually, quote unquote, caught off guard, like had no idea this was in the works. But yeah, I do got to run, but I thank you so much. Sorry to be so
Hey, Josh,
rude.
we're going to be on for extended coverage. So if you get the
all right,
come back,
maybe I'll bug you again.
Touch base with Steve. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Sky, I'm going to toss it straight to you just to pick up. You're in the defense trenches each and every day. Do you agree with his assessment that it actually came from the government side, not the defense side here? And also, how does this work? I mean, how does this play out, and why now?
I do agree with Josh's assessment that this came from the prosecution. My guess is that the defense all along has been pushing for something less than death. The reality is when you're a defense attorney in these death penalty cases, your number one goal is to save your client's life. So the whole time you're working towards, how do I get death off the table? Is there a way to resolve this without the death penalty, without a trial? It's a gamble. And, given the rulings, I think given the state that the case has been brought, where they're trying it, if I'm the defense in this case, I've probably been asking for something less than death since it was filed. It's hard to say. We were kind of musing about possibilities prior to going live as to why now the state has, decided to make a life without parole offer. I don't know if maybe they came across something or if they sat down with the families and just had a real conversation about what death penalty convictions look like. And the reality is even if he's convicted and sentenced to death, they have probably decades of appeals ahead of them. People sit on death row for a very long time these days, especially in these states. And so it's not as if he's going to face execution anytime soon. And it's going to be appeal after appeal, post-conviction, appellate work. They may have 30 years where the family's going to have to keep reliving this. And so as hard as it is sometimes to accept that he's not going to get the death penalty, he's just going to spend the rest of his natural life in prison, I do think, some of those conversations that are had are, this allows you to put it behind you. He will never again walk free. He will spend the rest of his natural life in prison. There is no possibility that he is ever getting out. He's also waiving all of his appeal rights, which means this is final. It's not coming back. They're not going to have to relive this over and over again every time something's filed or a petition's filed, where it kind of rips the Band-Aid off again. I think in some ways this does allow victims' families, while it may not be as harsh of a punishment as they wanted, it does allow some finality, and hopefully with that and in time, they can work towards healing as well.
This is mind-blowing news in the world of true crime. If you're just joining us, a little after 6 p.m. Eastern time today, which would be 3 in some parts of Idaho and 4 in others. They have 2 time zones. Word spread, News Nation breaking it, that Bryan Kohberger has taken a plea deal. He will serve life in prison without the possibility of parole in exchange for no death penalty. The next obvious question, Aaron, is this legally an admission of guilt? Is this now Bryan Kohberger saying, I did this?
Yes. I mean, if he has to plead guilty to all 4 of the murders, and he has to plead guilty to the burglary. So basically they just want him to, he's going to go in there, he's going to plead guilty to everything. Sorry, you look like you're going to ask me something else.
Well, so let's get to this. Julie Frew, who is our mod and on top of everything, says that there is a plea hearing July, I want to say 2nd or 3rd. Julie will put it back up, or the COE will give me the exact. It's in the next day or two. Aaron, walk us through that. Is this a hearing to discuss the plea, or at this hearing, will we already get the judge saying something along the lines of, have you agreed to this deal? Yes, I have. Do you understand that now you're going to be spending the rest of your natural life? Yes, I have, Your Honor. Is this going to be the actual moment in time where he is now remanded into custody for the remainder of his life during this hearing?
Well, I think that one of the important things that a lot of people don't understand. So as a prosecutor, one of the things that a lot of victims of crime just don't understand is that you are not their attorney. The prosecutor represents the state of Idaho, and we are prosecuting somebody who has broken the law. So the Victim Rights Act says that they are allowed to be heard, be present for every single hearing, and to be informed. When all that is said and done, it is still the prosecution's decision. It is the prosecutor's decision on what deals to make. And that was always kind of a hard thing. So it's, I did everything I could to make sure that they understood any reasoning for making a plea deal. And as good as a case is, there is never a sure thing at trial. Never. There's always, even if it's 98%, we're going to hang this guy. There's always something that can go wrong. There's something that doesn't go the way that you think it will. So there's always that consideration too, which was something that I would talk to victims about. This next hearing, it's hard to say. The way I saw it listed was also listed as a hearing. Normally a change of plea is a change of plea. It's possible that with a case this high profile, if the deal is really done, then the judge may then quickly set it for a change of plea so that they can get the sentencing set. There again, I agree with, I think, what Skye said, which is, or actually, I'm sorry, maybe it was Tara. We don't know 100%. They may have had a conversation like, well, they want us to take the death penalty off the table. There may have been that, but there needed to be, in my mind anyway, as a prosecutor who's worked on heavy victim cases, it's something that they needed to be a bigger part of that conversation. And like I say, I've had those conversations where I said, ultimately, this is my decision and you need to understand that. And so that it was very clear to them. But what they wanted, what they viewed as justice, was always incredibly important to me as a prosecutor. So if they really were blindsided the way that at least the Goncalves family is making it sound, then I think that's kind of a travesty, that they should have been more involved, and they should have been at least warned that this is why we're doing it. We think that this is the right thing to do. It's closure. 3 of the 4 families all want this to be over, which is very possible. 3 of the 4 families really want this to be over, and 1 wants him to go before the firing squad. Well, what do you do there? When you know that then those 3 families are going to be subjected to decades, really, of appeals. And I thought that the fact that the judge didn't grant the continuance, I was talking to somebody about this case today and said, you know, when something goes up on appeal, they're going to appeal every single ruling the judge made throughout the entirety of the last 2 years. They're going to appeal every single ruling he made. And they may say, district court got it right, district court got it right, district court got it right. Here, we think that you were wrong. And they can send it back for a new trial on the continuance alone, right? So, and then all of a sudden the family has to go through it all over again. So I think that there's a lot too, and I am curious as to what this hearing is, but I think the news is so fresh that I'm not entirely sure if they are setting it for a change of plea that fast.
And we are obviously just getting the breaking news a short time ago that Bryan Kohberger has taken a plea deal in the murder of the 4 University of Idaho students, something I don't think anyone at this late juncture was really expecting, although perhaps it has been on the table all along, which it certainly has, but just getting the word now and getting live reaction. We're going to keep rolling in guests and rolling them out, but huge thanks to 2 Idaho defense attorneys here, and Sky Lazaro in Utah coming to us. She is one of the best criminal defense attorneys in all the land. Tara Malik, so just picking up on what Aaron said, how do you see this hearing on Wednesday? I mean, could it happen this quickly? And then couple it with this question, will he have to allocute? That's essentially when a defendant gives their own statement. And is that during this hearing on Wednesday? What if family can't travel that fast? You know, does his family need to be there along with the victim's family? This seems like too soon for everyone to even, you know, wrap their heads around it, and let alone be in Boise, Idaho for this inside of Ada County. Your thoughts on the hearing coming up on Wednesday, which we will take live, of course.
So there will be a couple of different hearings, most likely. One will be to notify the court that the case is not going to forward to trial, and putting on the record that there has been a plea agreement reached, if one has in fact been reached by the parties here. So on Wednesday, it could just be the initial hearing saying that we've reached an agreement between the parties, and he's going to be entering a guilty plea, and here's what the plea agreement looks like. Plea agreements are not, one sentences. The agreements are lengthy. This one I would expect to be very lengthy, including terms about whether or not the parties are looking to bind the court to a particular type of plea agreement or plea deal. The court could reject that. So there's all sorts of different variables that could occur here. So Wednesday will likely just be that notification and could be the change of plea. Any sort of sentencing is going to be set out, though. Both parties are going to need time to get ready for a sentencing hearing. That's not going to happen on Wednesday. Up until this point, while they may have been working on this in the background, they've also been working and putting a lot of efforts toward the pretrial motions and the trial itself. So they're going to have to reset and turn their focus into a different kind of segment, which is all about the sentencing. Whether or not Bryan Kohberger would have the opportunity to give an allocution. So basically, an allocution is a statement to the court about these crimes, giving his side of it. Sometimes we hear, remorse being expressed by the accused, sometimes not. He'll have that opportunity, but he doesn't have to take it. So he could say nothing at all. The victims' families will also have an opportunity to speak to the court, in front of the court, and to with Bryan obviously in the room. So all of that would happen, but I cannot see a scenario where that would be happening on Wednesday.
This is a lot to digest. Again, Bryan Kohberger taking a plea deal, or set to take a plea deal. It is not finalized yet, in the murder of the 4 University of Idaho students back November 13th of 2022. Sky, I just want to give you a chance. You're in the courtroom for these sorts of things fairly often. Sometimes you yourself are asking for a plea deal. So what do you think we see at this hearing 2 days from now on Wednesday in Ada County in Boise, Idaho? How does this play out on Wednesday?
I would agree. I think I'd be a little surprised if they actually do a change of plea on Wednesday. It's 2 days from now. That's pretty short turnaround to pull together a plea document. but also to give adequate notice to families to be able to make arrangements to be there. So I would expect Wednesday to be more of a status hearing where they notify the court that they've reached a resolution, and then ask for a special setting for a change of plea hearing that all of the victims' families can be at. I mean, I don't know. This judge has done some wild things over the course of this case. So maybe he will say, if you're really going to enter a plea, you're doing it on Wednesday. But that gives you, a day to pull everything together in terms of a plea agreement. And like Tara said, these documents aren't a one-pager. They're going to have to go through. They're probably going to be some back and forth even about the facts that support the elements for the plea, which has to be included in them, the waiver language, those types of things. So this isn't your just sort of standard, I showed up in court, they gave me a good deal, I'm going to take it. And we all scribble really fast, some quick statement of facts that substantiate the elements of the crime a client's pleading guilty to, because we got, because it's, a case that isn't quite as in-depth as this. Two, with the, just with all the coverage on this case, my guess is there's going to be quite a few media requests as well. So I think courts have a tendency to take those things into consideration as well.
Aaron, thank you. And Aaron, to you, a lot of people are already asking if a defendant like Bryan Kohberger in the state of Idaho can profit if he takes a plea deal. In other words, can he write a book? Can he get movie rights for his family? I know there's Marcy's Law, which I think prohibits that in a lot of states. Is that the case in Idaho? This guy should not be able to profit.
Well, we have, and I actually don't know the precise answer to that on whether or not he can. Even when somebody's going away for the rest of their lives, judges can also order restitution to the families, and they could order such huge restitution to these families that he'll never see a penny of anything anyway. Neither would his family, because he would have to pay restitution for these crimes. So I as far as that, I'm not sure if he could. To kind of go back to one of the things that we were talking about when we were talking about where do we think that this came from, whether it came from the defense or whether it came from the prosecution. I kind of wonder if, just from what I've seen of Kohberger, I kind of wonder, and I just know from some defense attorneys that I've worked with, that I've had defense attorneys who I've had people just completely dead to rights. And the defense attorney is just pounding their head because he cannot get them to take a deal. And these people are facing life in prison the whole rest of their lives. And he can't get them to take a deal that might, get them out in their golden years or something. So sometimes it's just somebody who just keeps saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And then I kind of wonder with the timing, if a little bit of it did come from that side, because Ann Taylor, after losing every single one of these last motions, she's out of runway. She has nowhere else to go with this. And she may have had finally this sort of come to Jesus talk with him, where he may have finally decided, okay, I'll take the deal then. So I just kind of wonder, and we don't know. I mean, when everything is said and done, we may get more information about when this was first offered and which side it was that was holding out on this deal.
And that's an amazing point, Aaron. And Tara, if you can pick that up, Aaron just said they've essentially run out of runway. In the last ruling from Judge Stephen Hippler, we find out that, of course, there's going to be Ann Taylor had asked for more time. She said that they weren't prepared with the discovery. He said, okay, I'll give you basically one extra week, 5 days, which isn't a lot. And then they wanted to bring in an alternate suspect theory. They didn't have the goods on that, according to the judge. The judge said no. Are they just waving the white flag here?
No, I think, we've talked about this before, and I think it's true. I mean, the name of the game for all intents and purposes here was to get the death penalty off the table. At this point, it's like 5 or 6 different tries on how to get this how to get the death penalty off the table. So there were accusations of discovery violations. There were, suppression motions that had been filed. And so I wouldn't necessarily call this a white flag. I think it's exactly the best case scenario that they could have expected based on what we know about what the evidence was likely going to show in this case. Again, we haven't seen any of that evidence, but it's probably the best that he was going to get if they went through trial on this case. And the timing is interesting, I would say. There's a lot of things going on in this case that make it really unique and uniquely positioned. It's, we've had, for instance, allegations of violations of the gag order, for instance, and that's an ongoing side issue on perhaps the parallel track. So, was there anything out of that could have informed or pressured the parties to make some sort of plea deal? There's been issues surrounding witness availability. That could have been an issue as well for one or both sides. So there's a number of other variables that we just don't know the reason why that, they decided at this moment to enter into a plea agreement or plea deal. The state would have to be the one to make that offer. I mean, it's not like the defense can dictate and say, this is what I'm going to accept, and you have to offer it to me. So we know it's from the state side. I think we will learn more through the hearing on Wednesday. But certainly curious. There was a question too about profiting off of this situation, right? A book deal or so on and so forth. If you recall back, and the example that everyone's probably sick of hearing about is the OJ case, right? So he tried to profit off of that situation. There was a civil suit that was filed for wrongful death. It was filed by Nicole Brown's family, and they ended up winning that case and ended up garnishing all of the money that he had made off of that, or could have made off of that, intercepting it entirely. So it's not like, he's going to get some sort of windfall here. I doubt that these families are going to let that go if he even attempted to do something like that.
Here's some more news. Obviously, this is a breaking story. Bryan Kohberger set to take a plea deal in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students back November 13th, 2022, saying, I will spend the rest of my natural life in prison without parole in exchange for no death penalty. None of this is official yet. News Nation, the first to break it. And Sky Lazaro here, prosecutor said in a letter to families, this is the latest reporting, that the state was approached last week by Kohberger's defense team. So it was the defense going to the state, asking to be presented with an offer. Prosecutors said they met with available family. They weighed the right path forward and made a formal offer to Kohberger. How do you read this?
I think I was wrong. Maybe this entire time he was maintaining his innocence and electing to fight. And after, the latest rulings came out, which I think really hindered their ability to put on the defense they were hoping to, in terms of either alternative suspects or some other things, asking for more time because they weren't going to be prepared or couldn't get prepared. He might have said, hey, look, I'll consider a life without parole offer if they're willing to make one.
Aaron, so you hear Sky saying, look, the appeals process is decades. This puts him away. It's a win for the defense, but is this a win for the government?
I think it is. Like I said, there is no 100% certain, trial, because you've got people, you've got, jurors do the best that they can, but they're still just people. They can get hung up on strange things, right? The defense would be spending their time, questioning the entire investigation and did they follow up on all of the leads. They can't talk about alternate suspects, but they can talk about, well, what did you do with the leads? And did you follow up on every single one? And did you, and really try to call into question the efficacy of the investigation. So there's things that can go wrong in a jury trial. Even the best attorney, if you try hard cases, you learn that nothing is a slam dunk. Nothing is a sure thing, I guess is what I would say. I mentioned I was on a murder case, and the one that it was a double murder, and the family felt like death was too easy. They thought they wanted him to spend his life behind bars. And from that perspective, he's giving up his life. Prison is not going to be, it's not going to be an enjoyable life for him for the rest of his life. So while he does get to stay on the planet, I think that it's a good outcome, because if it was me, if I was the prosecutor and I was sitting down with that family, I would tell them to think long and hard about what this will do to you, worrying every single time it's appealed. And is the Supreme Court going to come back and say, you know what, this little technicality, it was prejudicial, and we are going to remand it back for a new trial. There's always that possibility. And that to me would be excruciating for a family member to have to constantly worry it's going to come back down. We're going to start the whole process over again. You're going to spend another 2 years waiting for it to go to trial or whatever. And I just think that would be brutal. So my encouragement, I think, would be, you get to put it behind you. This man's going to plead guilty. There's no more question of whether or not he's the one that did it, because somebody who really is innocent is not going to plead to 4 counts of murder in Idaho. It just isn't going to happen. And so they now know he did it. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison for it, and they get that closure. So I think that it really is a win from that perspective, and it eliminates any risk. There's always going to be a tiny bit of risk at trial. And there's always the possibility too that maybe the jury will convict him, but then they bring up stuff about his childhood, and he had a rough childhood or something that they find mitigating, and all of a sudden they give him life in prison, right? So that was always a possibility. Just because we went to trial doesn't mean that the jury would have wanted the death penalty. There's always that issue.
I'm going to go there with Tara Malik right now. And that is, there are even people in this chat saying they're forcing him to do this. He's not the guy. I'm getting tired of these conspiracy theorists on every single story. It appears, that people are saying he still didn't do it, even though Bryan Kohberger's defense team himself is set to say he did it. He's willing to serve 4 life sentences. Tara Malik, should this put an end to the debate, to the conspiracy theorists who are crying foul, saying you still have the wrong guy, despite the fact that his own team, and thereby he is saying, I did this, I killed those 4?
Yeah, it should. If he walks into court and he says guilty, he's going to be read again, each one of those counts, and the judge is going to ask him how he pleads to each one of those counts. And he is going to have to say the word guilty. And again, we haven't seen the plea agreement, but if the plea agreement is that he is pleading guilty, he's going to have to say that. And he is going to have to say that he understands what he's being accused of, and he's doing this knowingly and voluntarily, with the advice of counsel, and that he's moving forward and wants to be sentenced. So absolutely, it should totally end that conspiracy theory, because there is always a choice here. Even if it's a bad choice, there's a choice. If he decided he wanted to roll the dice and go to trial and not accept this plea deal, he could do that. It is not insignificant what he is pleading to. Yes, death penalty is off the table. However, it is still his entire life. He's losing his life. And even if he was sitting on death row, I think, Thomas Creech has been sitting on death row for over 50 years. So it's whatever he's doing, whether to a death penalty or just pleading guilty for a life imprisonment, he no longer has any freedom. So you wouldn't do that if you thought that you had some opportunity or chance to beat this. So yes, they've had some blows for sure as far as the evidence and this alternate perpetrator theory, but that doesn't mean that he's without a choice to proceed forward with the counsel that has been appointed to him, that has been advocating for him, vehemently advocating for him and fighting for him. He still has a choice, and he could say no, and he could move forward with this case.
Wow. Taking a breath here. Once again, breaking news in the murder of the 4 University of Idaho students. COE, if we can put up the picture of them. One of the problems with everyone in true crime across the board is we're always looking at that guy. We're always looking at the suspect, but these should be the 4 that we're really looking at. It's Ethan Chapin. He's a triplet, one of 3, now sadly only 2. Maddie Mogen. You've got Kaylee Goncalves and Ethan Chapin's girlfriend there on the right in the orange. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. These 4, not even in the prime of their lives, not even close, murdered now presumably by Bryan Kohberger. Again, his own defense getting ready to take a plea deal, saying he is the guy. I'm sick and tired of this conspiracy being the new facts. Get your head straight. If this guy's coming out and taking a deal, he did it. Not everything in this world is a conspiracy. So this guy coming out and saying he did it. With that said, Sky Lazaro, will the government have any sort of burden to show, and I don't mean a legal burden, I mean an actual burden here, to reveal any of the evidence that they have in this case and or the defense? Will they have to show their hand to the public to say, we had this, this, and this? Will there be public transparency?
They don't have an obligation. All they have to do is put sufficient facts in a plea form to support the elements of the crime. And generally what we see in these plea forms are just enough facts without putting all the gory, horrendous, awful things out there. I know the public loves to want to know things, but thinking about these families, and I'm guessing what some of those crime scene photographs looked like, really this is the best thing that can happen for them, is those things don't get to be chewed up and digested and all the things by the public, that it's gives them some privacy, for their loved ones as well. So I don't expect, I think a lot of this stuff will stay protected to some extent. I mean, I know there's the Freedom of Information Act once a case is resolved where you can get certain things. I know the way those have been treated in Utah, when you have photographs and autopsy pictures and things like that of deceased victims, those do not get turned over without a pretty brutal fight, if you can win it at all.
Tara, to you, just going back to this for a moment. So, it seems, and we heard Aaron say this, and I've heard many criminal defense attorneys say there is no such thing as a slam dunk case, and all you need is one person to not believe the story. With that said, it seems like the government had a pretty airtight case. We saw that Dateline episode that came out on May 9th. They had surveillance video of his car driving what appeared to be his car. Soon we'll be able to say his car, but what appeared to be his car driving by the scene, literally peeling off, speeding out right after the time of the murders. With that said, it seemed like the government had basically as airtight a case as you can get. They probably could have taken this to the next step and gotten the conviction. You think there's going to be any regret on the government's part here? There's already, just in this chat, there's some public outcry that they made the wrong choice here.
Is there going to be any regret? I don't know. I don't think so. You have the case that you have the evidence that you have, and you have the facts that you have, and you've got to do your best to put your case together using what's available to you. So I agree. And I think it was Aaron that said it. And I've heard Sky say it before, but there really isn't any slam dunk case. I mean, first, I want to go back to, we haven't seen any official evidence. Evidence has to be admitted at trial for it to be evidence. And so they still have to go through a bunch of hoops to get things admitted. So for instance, the picture of the car, or the video of the car that's going around the neighborhood, the state would still have to put on evidence connecting that particular car as being not only owned by Bryan Kohberger, but driven by Bryan Kohberger that evening. So it's not as simple as saying the car matches, right? So you have to jump through hoops like that to put your case together. And in between each of those steps, there's a possibility that the defense can jump in and do a really great cross-examination and get some reasonable doubt in the minds of these jurors. So the standard, the bar for the state is really high. You have to prove your case on every element for every crime beyond any reasonable doubt. And so when we say that there is no slam dunk case, and I think we're all aligned on that, it's because we've had cases where we thought were slam dunk. We had great evidence and we put it on, and the jury comes back and they're like, nope, I had a question because this could be a possibility. And you're going, you got to be kidding me. But it happens. And so you can never say that there's 100% risk-free case. This case, again, we have some new information, or had some newer information to us, to the rest of us, about a potential another eyewitness, a food delivery driver that may or may not have had information and saw Bryan Kohberger. But again, the big mystery here has been there hasn't been a definitive eyewitness that we knew of. That could remain an issue for the state. We don't know how this other witness, the food delivery driver, was going to testify. When you're putting on witnesses, you have to deal with memory issues and anything in their background and history that might draw a question as to their credibility. So, there is always risk on both sides, and there is always risk on the state side as well, because the burden is just so high.
Well, once again, if you're joining us, Bryan Kohberger is set to take a plea deal. News Nation, the first to report this. He is the accused killer of 4 University of Idaho students: Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, and Xana Kernodle. At least one family, the Goncalves family, is speaking out against this decision to spare this person's life. In lieu of going to prison for 4 life sentences. That is what is set to happen. Aaron, to you, could this plea deal here basically amount to new evidence that the government has? Because now we are learning that the defense went to the prosecution. Is it possible the government has something else up their sleeve that no one knows about, that they found in discovery, and they're just saying there is no way we can overcome this mountain, so therefore we've got to have our client take a plea deal?
Well, I mean, so I've never been a defense attorney. I've only been a prosecutor. But, to me, just in what I've seen on this case, with between the car, between the knife sheath, the DNA evidence, all of his internet searches about Ted Bundy, to me, this kind of felt a little bit like, to use the term, an orgy of evidence, which we don't say a lot, but occasionally you have it. And this one is one of those where you've got the type of evidence, which to me is the DNA evidence, and then him going online and almost purchasing another knife sheath, right? He had it in his Amazon basket. Those kind of things, it's like, well, his DNA was there at the murder scene next to the dead body. And now here's all of this other stuff to shore it up. And so, I mean, it was a really strong case. I don't think they needed anything else. I think that it's more to kind of go back to that analogy that the defense finally was out of runway, right? They've got no options. And I've never been a defense attorney, but I definitely would not want to have had to put on that case as that defense attorney with no alibi. And really their only option, you have to remember Kohberger's claim then that he was driving around, he drove around a lot and looked at the stars at night. He would have to get on the stand. I've had a lot of defendants take the stand. I've never had it work out for one of them. It just does not, it just doesn't go well. You get a prosecutor that, knows what they're doing. And I know that most of the defense attorneys that I'm friends with never want their clients to take the stand. And how is he gonna, once he's on the stand, which is the only way he's able to say, I wasn't there, I didn't do it, I was out looking at the stars, is if he takes the stand. Once he does that, all of a sudden it's, you're a big fan of Ted Bundy. I mean, you know what I mean? It's all of these things, because that goes to credibility. So even if on direct, they try to keep it really narrow, but if it has to do with bias or credibility, then it's kind of fair game on cross. So it would be a disaster. So he had nothing. I mean, and I'm curious, I guess, because if the defense attorneys feel differently, but I don't think she had anything to put on. And if I could I wanted to touch on one thing that Skye was talking about when you were talking about the evidence at sentencing. And I would just say that what really matters now is on whether or not we'll get to see any of the evidence. And I think it was Tara who mentioned we have binding plea agreements in this state, and you could do a plea agreement that is not binding on the court, or you can do a plea agreement that is. So if they do it as a binding agreement that says life without the possibility of parole, and the judge agrees to it, then there's really no need. The victim impact statements gives the families their day to say everything they want to say about what he's taken from them and how, and the impact that they're going to suffer with for the rest of their lives, regardless of the outcome, right? They don't get their kids back. And so there would be that. But I will say that depending on how that plea agreement's crafted, which we just don't know yet, if it's not binding on the court to where there's a chance they could come in and they could say, well, we'll do this if you take off death, but we want to be able to argue for 30 years fixed, because that's the way sentencing in Idaho, we have a fixed portion and then an indeterminate. So you could do 30 years to life or 40 years to life, right? This is a young man. And we just don't know exactly the terms of that plea deal yet. If they had a chance to argue for less, then you could bring in evidence at sentencing. And I've done it on plea deals many times, not on murder cases, but I think I told you that I used to do child predator cases. And on those kind of cases, if there was a chance, if they got to argue for less, and I wanted to make sure that the judge went to the very maximum of that plea deal, then I would present evidence, sometimes text messages between, people, things like that that make it much more damning. And I did that regularly. But so it'll really depend on the terms of this plea agreement, which we just don't know yet.
Yeah. By the way, Bryan Kohberger, the reason we're on the air coming to you right now, we were actually set to do a completely different show on him because there was a hearing in Pennsylvania. Eventually, I will get to that for some people who are going to be subpoenaed who said, hey, I didn't really know this guy that well. Why do I have to go to Idaho? Well, now it appears that they don't have to, because Bryan Kohberger has apparently agreed to a plea deal, which he is set to take at a future date. If you are new to STS, we've got a lot of new people here. We do a nightly talk show, the only show of its kind on all the YouTubes anywhere, with amazing guests like you're seeing here, the best guests in all of true crime. And we break down trending criminal cases. So please join us on your average night. But tonight is anything but average. And we're joined now by two others. We've got Dave Aronberg, who is the former Florida state attorney for Palm Beach County, now in private practice as a defense attorney. Dave Aronberg, your reaction. We also have Howard Bloom, who has written a book on this entire case, joining us as well. But Dave Aronberg, your reaction to this news.
I was really surprised because I understand why the defense would do it. They got rejected on the third-party culprit defense they wanted to do to point the finger at some bogus real killer. They also got rejected on the request for an extension. But why did the prosecution enter into it? And I thought perhaps the victims' families wanted it. But then I saw the Goncalves family post that she was blindsided too, the family there. So did the other families support this? I don't know. That's why I'm still trying to figure out why they did it, because I thought this guy's headed towards the death penalty because they had the goods on him. It was so obvious. I mean, they had so much evidence against him. And this is the kind of guy, a wannabe serial killer, who deserved it. And in a conservative state like Idaho, I thought he would get it. I mean, Chad Daybell got it after all. So that's my only question. I had a case once where we cut a plea deal with a brutal killer to give him like 40 years when he could have gotten more because he agreed to tell us where the victim's body was buried. And that's the families wanted that closure. I wonder, as the guest was saying earlier, if this is part of the plea deal that he must say something, because if he just went on trial, he would clam up. He definitely wouldn't take the stand, and we may not get anything from him. So maybe that's part of the deal, but I still don't understand the whole thing. One other thing I'd like to add, Joel, is that whenever we've talked about Bryan Kohberger, you and I and any other show, all we get in response, we get all these Kohberger fanatics, these delusional fans of Kohberger who insist on his innocence. Where are they now? I hear chirps out there from birds. I don't hear any chirps from these conspiracy theorists. Well, I knew they would just leave us and find another conspiracy theory, because that's the beauty of being conspiracy theorists. Once your conspiracy is blown up, you just find another conspiracy theory, another lie to believe.
Dave, I'm so happy you brought that up, because it irritates the you-know-what out of me. And there are people in this chat right now saying, despite this alleged plea deal that has been this story broken by News Nation, there are people in this very chat who are saying they're just forcing this guy into a plea deal. You're not forcing anybody into a plea deal. Enough with the conspiracy theories. We're seeing it play out in other places, and enough already. Howard Bloom. When the Night Comes Falling, I believe, is the title of the book. Howard has written a book about this case. There's another book coming out by another author you may have heard of, James Patterson. But Howard, again, just overarching to you, your thoughts on hearing this. Did you think we would see this day?
I thought it was a real possibility, especially in the events of the past week. However, what's so troubling is we're going to be left with all sorts of unanswered questions. Even if the judge demands a statement from Kohberger, who knows how candid he's going to be? We'll never really know the real motive. Kohberger might say something he thinks the court wants him to say, but we'll never really know what was going on in his mind. We might not ever know where the murder weapon is, how he was able to get out of the house without leaving a blood trail. We'll never know what went on between him and his father on the ride back in December from Washington State University to Pennsylvania. We won't know if people in his family suspected him. We will just never know. It'll be one big mystery, and it's going to be deeply unsatisfying, I think, to the families of the victims and for people who have followed the case. And I wonder about justice. Is this a just settlement? I'm, a New York liberal. I was never for the death penalty. I was shocked by the fact that he was going to have to face a firing squad. And yet I'm a father, and I thought, well, maybe if there ever was a time for a death penalty, and a firing squad, this would be the case for it.
It certainly would. Mountain of evidence. Sky Lazaro, just back to you. There is a hearing on Wednesday, but this is not and I'm going to say this in legal terms, this isn't the hearing. This is not the hearing. This is just a hearing. But when we get to the hearing where he takes his plea deal, can you kind of walk us through the steps? Judge Hippler will gavel court into session. How long will this real hearing take? What is the protocol? Does Kohberger speak first? Do the victims speak afterwards? How does it all work?
So the judge is going to go through a plea colloquy with him, and I'm guessing in a case like this, he's going to be really thorough in the way he goes through it. And so he's going to go through with him the constitutional rights that he has, the constitutional rights that he's waiving by agreeing to enter into this plea agreement. Those include your right to have a jury trial, your right to be represented by counsel at a trial, to confront and cross-examine any witnesses the state has, to compel witnesses to testify on your own behalf, to either take the stand or not on his own behalf. He's also, it sounds like as part of this, going to have to waive any appellate rights that he would have. And so this really it's going to be quite a bit of formality, I think we're going to see from the judge, because he's going to go through and ask him, are you satisfied with the advice that you got from counsel? Are you doing this knowing and voluntarily? Do you feel that you are of sound mind? Are you under the influence of any drugs that would impair your ability to enter into this plea freely and voluntarily? Has anyone forced or coerced you or made any promises to you other than what's contained in the agreement to enter the plea? And they'll go through all of that before they actually get to the facts of the case. And then, once they kind of lay all that framework, then the judge is going to go through count by count. What's the factual basis? It's probably going to be written within the agreement, and he may ask either the state or the defense to put it on the record. And then he's going to look at Bryan Kohberger and say, is this what you did? And how do you plead to count one? He's going to have to say that he's guilty. And they're going to go through that count by count, making sure that there's sufficient facts to support all the elements of the crime. And the deal with pleading guilty is there's a few things that defendants get to make the decisions on. We can counsel them. We can tell them what we think is the risks or the pros and cons to each thing. And one of those things is whether or not to plead guilty to, and the other is whether or not to testify on their own behalf. All these other things that kind of go into litigation. Sure, you work with your clients and they may be mad at you because you give the other side a continuance, or they want you to brief something that is not going to be well taken, so you don't brief it. But in terms of entering a plea, that is the absolute right of Bryan Kohberger. And so the judge is going to go through that colloquy with him, ask him all of those questions, and then ask him how he pleads, and he's going to have to say that he's guilty. And then likely, I don't know if the judge, my guess is that the judge will ask the state, is this the plea agreement? Did you consult with the families? I don't know if the families will want to, present any victim impact statements. Generally, those are reserved for sentencing, not necessarily at a change of plea, unless you have a family who wants to object or oppose the plea or be heard in terms of the entry of plea. And then it's, ultimately up to the judge. I think in a case like this, 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole means he's never getting out. I don't see this judge not accepting this plea. I think this is probably the right resolution for everyone, but that's what I would expect at a change of plea hearing. Like I said, this judge has moved things along quickly at times, but I don't expect this to happen on Wednesday. I think this is going to be more of a status hearing, and then he's going to set an actual change of plea hearing so that, I don't know if all those families are close or if they, are out of town or can make arrangements to be there. He's going to give them probably adequate time in order for them to be present, for Bryan's family to be present if they wish to be, and to be able to put that plea form together.
Yeah. By the way, we're already working on a show with some inmates about what his life will be behind bars. We're going to be working on a show with profilers and psychologists. Why did he cave? If this guy, thinks he's this, serial killer who can elude justice, why is he now caving in? We're going to discuss all these things in the coming days. We've got the hearing on Wednesday.
Things get real fast though the closer you get to trial for people. I've had clients that for years that were like, don't bring me those pleas, and I'm like, I have an obligation to tell you. And then all of a sudden you get on the eve of trial and they're like, I changed my mind. What's the best you can do?
Yeah, even wannabe tough guy killers, when they know that they're going to be killed via firing squad
real fast.
Yeah, suddenly they're not such cool serial killers, alleged still serial killers, but not for long. Tar Malik, to you. Ann Taylor, the public defender defending Bryan Kohberger, publicly stated, my client is innocent. She didn't, he's 100% innocent, but she definitely clearly stated he's innocent. Is that just defense work? Do you think there's a scintilla of her that actually believed or believes that he is innocent?
Well, what I can tell you is that she has an ethical responsibility and duty when she's presenting or giving statements in court to be candid with the court. So if she's standing next to her client on the date they do the plea hearing and she says she's in agreement with his plea of guilty, then that's what it is. So, cases develop over time, evidence gets exchanged or discovery gets exchanged between the parties. You can't hold her to a statement that she made early on in this case. There are numerous factors that go into a guilty plea and entering into a guilty plea. Kohberger didn't have to or doesn't have to. He hasn't done it yet. So we'll see whether he actually does enter into court and enter that guilty plea. But he doesn't have to tell his attorney, yes, I'm guilty. No, I'm not guilty. I mean, he certainly could have represented to her and may still be representing to her that he's completely innocent. So her duty is to her client, and her duty is also to be candid to the tribunal, which is the court and the judge here.
Yeah, by the way, we're also on Sean Diddy Combs' verdict watch when that comes down, which could be tomorrow, could be Wednesday, could be in 30 days. We have no idea, but you know where to go to watch it, because we'll have it for you first and best, because we got the best guests in all of true crime and a better community. Dave Aronberg. I never have Dave this quiet for this long, but we've got 5 amazing guests. And by the way, we're footloose and fancy free here, and I know some of the guests are going to have to go. So if you guys need to jump, we're going to be doing rolling coverage here for a little bit. Just raise a hand and let me know. But Dave Aronberg, for those who do not know, was a Florida state attorney until much less than a year ago, I think. And so he was the prosecutor. He's the Bill Thompson in Florida was. So Dave, I had asked Sky, not to throw her under the bus, and Josh Ritter, former prosecutor the year before you got here, how did this deal go down? And they both thought that the prosecution went to the defense, but we're learning the defense went to the prosecution. Take us through these steps. You're the prosecutor. You're the #1 law enforcement guy in Palm Beach County. You get a call from the defense. How do you work out a deal like this, especially that is going to be your highest profile case of your career?
Well, the defense calls with an offer, and then the prosecutor on the case will go to the boss. In this case, a case similar to that, it would be me, and then we talk about it. And I had a case, remember the killer clown case, which you discussed? That was a cold case. Similar type of thing. Hey, the defense came, and then with a deal, and the prosecutor said, I like the deal. I think it's a good deal. And I said, well, because the elected DA has different priorities. Like, it's not just the case getting resolved. It's, well, what about the court of public opinion? What about the families? What about my legacy? These are things that the elected DA has to worry about that the line prosecutor who wasn't elected anything doesn't necessarily think about. And so that's why you have to have that conversation. And a lot of times the DA will say, no, let's tighten it up to make sure there's no room for appeal here. And let's do it. But generally, the first thing that the elected DA will say is, what about the families? Are the families on board? Because the last thing you want as an elected district attorney is for the families to go out there and blast you and your office and your plea deal, make you look weak. So that's why I'm wondering what happened. What was the lack of communication with the Goncalves family? Because you should never have a family out there blasting you on social media. I mean, they've already been victimized enough in their life to be victimized again by being blindsided by this. That's unacceptable and a bad look for the prosecutor.
Yeah, and Dave, to that point, the COE with some more breaking news a short time ago, we're learning that they got this deal brought to them, Bill Thompson, the Latah County prosecutor. And in the statement, it's worded weirdly. He said, we reached out to available family, something along those lines. This, again, is the highest profile case that will likely ever happen in Latah County. You've got the most vocal family in the Goncalveses, and they weren't available at that moment, and you just cut the deal and put it out in front of the media, and now they're furious. That seems like minor league baseball, not major leagues.
That's an interesting choice of word there, available.
Mhm.
So this deal came on probably quickly. They probably talked to the other families. The other families were okay. And then they perhaps, whoever their contact is at the Goncalves family, maybe they didn't get back to them, or they knew that they would not support it, or maybe they said, you know what, we don't like this deal, but we'll discuss it. And then they never gave them a final answer. So they just went with it. But either way, you just can't have this out there where the family is blasting you. Now, you have to have a better explanation than that, because it's the available family. That doesn't make much sense. You're right. This case means everything to that family. So you would believe that they would respond to your phone calls.
Yeah. Howard Bloom, let me ask you, I know you're not a psychologist, but you live in New York City. You see people.
That makes me a psychologist and live in New York now.
What do you think is going on in Bryan Kohberger's mind? I mean, you did a lot of research about this guy. You know, it seems like he wanted to emulate Ted Bundy. You got the hoodie shot, very awkward, believed to be on the spectrum. But what do you think is happening with him? Why would he cave in now?
Before I address that, let me just say what I think happened with the Goncalves family.
Sure.
About their not being available. I think, that was a real affront to them. And I think the prosecution did it almost on purpose. They said, we don't want to deal with him. He's been a thorn in our side throughout this whole case. Why should we have to be held up by he's just going to disagree with this? So we'll just not even really try to get him. Maybe they sent an email to his attorney at lunchtime or something like that. I mean, they're pretty available. One is always able to get in touch with them or their attorney, Shannon Gray. I think there was some deliberate scheming in this. As to what's going in Bryan Kohberger's mind, again, this is pure speculation. But I think for him, the real tragedy for him would have been if no one ever knew that he was responsible for this crime. I think he wanted people to know that he did this. I think he wanted them to know that he had become this monster who could actually accomplish this, that he could become a man of action. And now with it being, his sentencing just makes him complete. He's did it. He's fulfilled his life mission. I think he can go off to prison. And I think he believes he can live a life that for him will be fulfilling because he has this, oddly enough, I think, a sense of pride in what he's done.
If you haven't seen it, we had Gary Bricado, who studies serial killers for a living, and Ann Burgess, who is a living legend, Dr. Ann Burgess, both doctors, PhDs. They were on the show before they ever caught Bryan Kohberger in the 7 weeks leading up to his arrest, and they profiled Kohberger almost to a T. I'm going to try to reunite that team in the next few days just to get their take on what they think is going on, because these are the people who study these killers day in and day out. So we'll see what they say. Aaron, a lot of people are asking why can't, there was just a super chat, and there's so many people tonight. If you want to drop a super chat, that'll probably be the easiest way for me to see the comment, but I keep kind of trying to scroll down. But a lot of people, Aaron, are asking, why can't the government compel something out of Bryan Kohberger? Tell us where the weapon is. Tell us why you did this. Everyone wants to know why. Everyone wants a motive. Why doesn't the government have that sort of pull?
Well, I mean, they can, one of the other guests mentioned, where the body was buried. I mean, there are ways that you can craft those things into a plea deal, including, more of an admission than just pleading guilty. So sometimes those are in there. Okay, well, we'll take death off the table, but you have to plead guilty to everything, spend the rest of your life in prison and tell us where the knife is or where you discarded it. Something like that. I mean, they can put that in there. I don't know why I'm still sticking with my sense of this has been that Kohberger has been a difficult client for Ann Taylor. I think he's been singing, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. I didn't do this. And that maybe when she said he's innocent, that she absolutely believed that. And then, over time, over the course of this, as she's working with him, sometimes you start to see that crack in the veneer. And now there's so much evidence piling up. You have to remember, when she first comes out and gets signed on to this case, she doesn't know all of the evidence that the state has. And frankly, it takes a while for the state to go through everything that they've been doing, right? They're writing search warrants. They're getting all of this information. And so I think that he's been a difficult client. You know, the other thing that you just mentioned that I'd forgotten about too is that he is on the spectrum, or at least that's what they're saying. There's another thing that the state has to give a lot of serious thought on the penalty phase of the trial. Is a jury, if they're going to come out here and say he has mental illness, he was always born this way, he doesn't understand certain things, he lacks the emotional breadth to understand this type of crime, you know, those kind of things. And maybe they felt like there would be enough that they would take the death penalty off the table. And guess what? You end up exactly where we are now. So if the jury wasn't willing to impose the death penalty because of some of this mitigating stuff of him potentially being on the spectrum, things like that, you know, then that's a big risk too, because you're dragging the family through, right? They'd probably be there in the courtroom. They're looking at the photographs, right? That's tough stuff. And yet I know many families who will sit through it all. And it's terrible to have to sit through that kind of presentation of evidence. And then there's always the chance he's going to take the stand and say, I would never, I wasn't even there, and hear the person lie, which is really hard for the victims' families. And if they felt like there is enough of a chance on the penalty phase that they could have lost it, then that's something that I would definitely have a serious heart-to-heart with the families about and say, why put yourselves through this? This will be done. This will be a done deal, and we may not get the death penalty anyway. And guess what? All of the appeals are still on the table. Just because they don't impose death, he still has his appeals, which means it's still not over. So when I had forgotten about the spectrum issue, but I think that could have been a big factor for the state.
Yeah. Thank you. And Tara, by the way, I believe Fil Waters, who is America's most respected detective, the guy investigated over 400 homicides. He's on every Friday with us. He's set to join in a few minutes, and we're going to continue to cover this for a little bit longer. But of course, if you're just joining us, the breaking news is Bryan Kohberger, the accused killer of 4 University of Idaho students, back in November 13th of 2022, is getting set to take a plea deal instead of the potential the death penalty. So he's getting ready to say, yes, I did this, to plead to 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Shout out to Dave Aronberg, who is Ellie Modoc's superhero. He's also a best guest, and he and Howard Bloom were on the show just now. Howard Bloom has a book about this case, When the Night Comes Falling. Tara Malik, to you, people are asking, so where does he go from here, literally, physically? Do you have an idea? Do we know what prison, state prison in Idaho, I assume the highest security, highest level security, is where he will go? I don't know what that is. Do you happen to know what that is? And I assume he's going to have to be in protective custody, maybe for the rest of his life, because he's going to be a huge target.
Yeah, I mean, right now he's being held in Boise. He's going to go at the jail. I believe he will be going to a maximum security prison with and they've got a death row area of that prison. So that's where he will be headed and where he will be staying. So he'll join the likes of Thomas Creech, who is also on death row and waiting execution. He obviously had that failed attempt earlier, I think this year or end of last year. So as far as how soon that's going to be happening, that's not going to happen until we get through the sentencing phase here.
Yeah. Sky, back to you. It wasn't very long ago that Idaho switched their primary form of capital punishment from lethal injection to the firing squad, and it's not set to take place still, I think, for a few more years. But they did try to execute a guy named Thomas Creech within the last year, maybe a year ago, and they couldn't do it. He was too dehydrated. They tried to do it with an injection, and it was a botched attempt. Do you think this factored in. Bryan Kohberger had to know they tried to kill this guy and it didn't work, which the argument was made that was cruel and unusual punishment, that it was inhumane. But do you think this guy, probably underneath it all, he's a scaredy cat. He's probably a coward. He watched this guy be put to death and it was unsuccessful. And now he realizes he's going to go in front of 4 or 5 people in a firing squad while he is wearing a mask over his head. Do you think the method had anything to do with the decision here?
I think that's an interesting idea. I think, lethal injection sounds a lot more pleasant than waiting for someone to shoot you. So I think that's very possible. I don't know. I mean, I have these conversations with clients all the time about to plead or not to plead, and everybody wants to know what are my chances at trial, and that's never anything like we've talked about you can ever give them. And I think there's a good possibility that it just started to get, maybe it got real for him finally, and the possibility that the state of Idaho could put him to death. That I think we all, or most people, have a sense of preservation, even the most depraved of us, or people who commit heinous crimes. I think everybody wants to survive, although we did recently have someone in Utah who actually elected for the firing squad as a method of execution. So, but I think it's more, and bringing up the autism thing again, when you defend people who have different mental health issues, it's a different type of conversation, because it's, they have to understand what the real possibilities are, what this is really going to look like. And, that might have been a lot of hard conversations that they had with him, depending on where he's at on the spectrum, to make this real. And maybe he just finally grasped it. But I do think the method sometimes can play a role in whether or not that's something you want to roll the dice with.
Yeah. Interesting. And this is a very interesting comment to me from Chris Buono writes, I think Kohberger's decision was ultimately a power trip for him. Very interesting psychological take. And I don't know that I disagree with that he's still pulling the strings all this time later. We got some more breaking news here. TMZ is reporting that Xana Kernodle's family is also furious, just like Kaylee Goncalves. They apparently spoke. I'm going to read this to you directly. This is attributed to TMZ. The family of Xana Kernodle is livid over the plea deal offered to accused murderer Bryan Kohberger. They told prosecutors they had better not go through with it. Kim Kernodle, Xana's aunt, was so furious she was in tears, and she tells TMZ prosecutors floated the idea of a plea deal a few days ago, and the family made it clear, no way. When TMZ spoke with Kim, she was on a conference call with prosecutors. She says prosecutors told her the defense approached prosecutors with a plea deal. Again, the defense approached the prosecutors with a plea deal, and the prosecution went along to, quote unquote, spare the families the pain of a trial. Kim says it's ridiculous because at least 2 of the families, hers and the Goncalves family, wanted Kohberger to face a jury. I'll stop it there. Aaron, your reaction to hearing the reaction of this family whose child was killed by this alleged killer.
Yeah, and it is something that, not to be repetitive, but it is something that I said earlier, and I've had difficult conversations with victims and their families. And the fact is we're the prosecutor, we're the state, we represent the state, and we have to make the prosecutorial decisions. We are the ones that decide whether or not to make a plea deal. Again, I think that if that even if two of the families, so say now we've heard from two, so now it could be 2-2. There could be two that just want this behind them, that just want to be able to not have to think about this monster ever again and move on to grieving their daughter. By the way, trials like this, it sort of stunts the grieving process. These people end up in sort of a weird purgatory. I mean, and even victims of crime, not even, families of decedents, but people who have suffered really terrible crimes, even they don't really start to grieve or heal until this process is over. It sort of puts them in this holding pattern. But so as a prosecutor, if I've got two families who want it over, two that have made it clear, if I had communicated with them and made them understand, you're not the prosecutor, I don't represent you, but it matters to me how you feel. But you need to understand, I believe they have enough mitigating circumstances at the penalty phase that they may not sentence him to death. And because of that, we would be putting you guys through needless trauma of the trial, and we might end up in the exact same place. If we do it this way, no appeals. It's over. And you don't have to sit through the trial, like I said, with the photos and everything, right? You don't have any of that. I mean, crime scene photos to families would be horrific. And obviously we work with them and we let them know when the evidence is coming on so they can leave the room. But there are certain ones who feel like they need to be there and see everything. And as a prosecutor, but that's the way the conversation is supposed to go. I am going to do this, but I want you to know, I understand where you're coming from. I understand you're frustrated. And then I would give them all of my rationale for why I think this is the very best outcome that will give them the most peace long-term. And that's the way they should not have been blindsided under any circumstances, but they need to remember that it's not their case. They're not a plaintiff in a case. They are tragic victims in a case. And the prosecutor is prosecuting on behalf of the state to somebody who broke the laws of the state. And that's a really important distinction.
And very well articulated, I might add. So, Tara, let me go on here. This is now Kim Kernodle, who is Xana Kernodle's aunt. We've got Len Ver joining us, who worked in the prison systems for a long time. We'll get to him in a moment. Welcome to Len. But Kim goes on here. This is now Xana Kernodle's aunt. She says prosecutors were especially concerned that the families would have to see the gruesome crime scene photos of their loved ones. But she says, we know how graphic they are. We know the graphics, she says. They were not trying to spare us. Kim also says when her family got a call from prosecutors a few days ago about a deal, they were vague. Prosecutors never mentioned taking the death penalty off the table. And what's especially puzzling, Kim says prosecutors told her there was enough evidence to secure a guilty verdict. So I forget the wording that Howard Bloom used. Deliberate scheming. I wrote it down. Do you think there was deliberate scheming by the government here? I mean, ultimately, the buck stops with them in terms of the decision. But ethically speaking, do you think that they were transparent enough with the families? Because it sounds like two families are absolutely livid right now.
Well, I think we have to, again, separate the emotional responses of the families, which are absolutely justified. I mean, this is a horrific, horrific crime. I cannot even imagine the emotions they've been going through and the grief process that they've been going through. I don't know that I would call it scheming. I mean, we just, quite frankly, we don't know. To Aaron's point, the state has an obligation. It's not necessarily to like a plaintiff's lawyer would be, for instance. Their client is the state. And so I don't think that there was scheming. Could there have been better communication? Maybe. We don't know. Would that have eliminated the negative emotions or this anger that the victims' families are feeling? Maybe not. I mean, even if there was communication, at the end of the day, the victims' families felt strongly about the death penalty, and the state thought it better to proceed in this fashion. That's not going to take away, it's not going to resolve the issue. So I would say that there's, it's not a solution necessarily. to say with additional time, they could have changed their minds, for instance, on the position here. The other thing, I want to go back and correct something I said, and this is what happens when I multitask, which I shouldn't. I was looking for more news on this to see what else is coming out. So I to your question, and one of the big kudos to the community, because someone had pointed out, why would he be on death row in the prison if he's not sentenced to death? You're absolutely correct. That was a misstatement. He will be housed and probably at maximum security, but not with the other death row inmates now that we don't have death row on the table. So.
There you go. I want to thank Aaron, Tara, and Sky, and you guys are more than welcome. And I would love it if you stuck around, but we're basically at 8, so I don't want to keep you for longer than you guys want to be here. So it's totally your call. If you want to pop off in a few minutes, feel free to do so. I'm going to get to Len in a minute, but we've got another former public defender and a very formidable criminal defense attorney out of Utah. We've got Utah repping here with Sky and Greg Skordas. Greg, your reaction to the news that Bryan Kohberger is allegedly set to take a plea deal instead of being put to death potentially?
Maybe not too surprised. I think that he was facing the only way that he would do this is if the state took the death penalty off the table, which I'm assuming they did, and which I'm assuming means all 4 of the alleged victims' families are on board with that, which is a little bit surprising. On the other hand, death penalty cases, we know, can take years, can take decades, can be fraught with appeals and motions and whatnot. And maybe people just felt that it was a time to put the case to bed. But his lawyer had been posturing so much and doing so much to make it appear that she was going all out. And you kind of have to do that in a case like this, Joel. But yeah, I mean, nothing ever surprises me anymore.
Yeah. And Greg, we were talking about this at the onset. We started over 2 hours ago. And again, I'm not trying to throw Sky under the bus here or Josh Ritter, but they both thought that the government went to the defense, but we're finding out it's the other way around. The defense went to the government here and said, hey, we need to cut a deal. What do you think prompted this? What was like sort of the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back?
Hard to say. And I'm not surprised that we would have predicted that the government went to the defense, but they must have felt that the case was so overwhelming and realized that they were down to the last days before the trial and felt like they needed to do a Hail Mary to save the kid's life. I don't know. I mean, we do a lot of that. The attorneys that are on this call right now, sometimes you do what you need to do to get a case resolved, even if it's literally at the courthouse steps. So they must have felt that the case was fairly overwhelming and that they were going to lose. And, having done death penalty cases from both sides, that's not something you want to be dealing with for the next 20 years.
Yeah. By the way, there was a ton of news. We were on the air late last night into the morning hours because of the murder of 2 firefighters in North Idaho. A third was shot, and now they've just released the names of the victims. So I just want to take a moment. If you caught any of it, you'll know that there was a miles-long procession for these heroes. It was Battalion Chief Frank Harwood, 42. He's with the Kootenai County Fire and Rescue. He was shot on Canfield Mountain by this 20-year-old accused shooter who is now no longer with us. This guy was a firefighter of 17 years, a father of 2 kids, a loving husband, a veteran of the Army National Guard, where he served as a combat engineer. So not only was he a firefighter, he served in the Army National Guard as well. The other firefighter who was killed is a Coeur d'Alene Fire Department battalion chief. His name is John Morrison, 52. He joined the department in 1996. He served more than 28 years. And the one who was injured, also a Coeur d'Alene Fire Department engineer, Dave Tisdall, Tysdal, 47. He was wounded, but is expected to survive. So the wounded firefighter is a Coeur d'Alene Fire Department engineer, Dave Tisdall. The other Coeur d'Alene firefighter, who's no longer with us, may rest in peace, Fire Department Battalion Chief John Morrison, 52, and the third who died here, 2 of the 3 died. Battalion Chief Frank Harwood, 42. He was with the Kootenai County Fire and Rescue. So another very tragic story. Idaho needs a break, and who knows, maybe cutting a deal is, but not to the families, at least not now. Len Vare served in the correctional system for a long time. He was a warden, and you'll remind me which state, because I know you bounced around a little, Len. But bottom line question, and it might sound crass, but how long does a guy like Bryan Kohberger last in state prison with these charges and with this plea agreement?
I was in Nevada prison system, to answer your first question, and I went to California, and I was a jail commander there for about 10 years. Back in the day, these kinds of crimes used to be fairly notorious, and these people, as soon as they got into prison, they would be placed into protective custody. But, you know, modern prisons, they classify these types of individuals with these high-profile cases into special classification units. And, you know, it is feasible that someone like him could live decades in the prison system in a max custody environment. And the system's designed to sort of allow people like these to safely be housed. I remember when I first started in corrections, you get these kinds of cases, there would be about a dozen people lined up to sort of take him out or attack him, just because that gave them notoriety and that gave them sort of street cred or whatever gangs that they might want to sort of do those kinds of things. Today, I think the correctional facilities are much more aware of those kinds of things, and because of prison litigation and everything else that comes with it, they try to classify them into housing units that are safer. So most likely he'll end up being housed in the most secure facility, the maximum custody facility. He'll probably be there for decades before they might even consider moving him to maybe a high, medium, or even a max custody facility that's not maybe a super max facility.
I'm going to get back to you on the max custody environment. You make it sound like he's going on a cruise ship a little bit. So I'll break that down in a moment. But let me just get back around the horn here. Tara, I know I got word that you've got to bounce off. So let me give you a quick final word and thank you for being here.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you looking for here next?
I'm going to be really interested in the details of this plea agreement. So we know, a couple of things so far, that it's consecutive life sentences, that he's pleading guilty to the 4 counts of murder, 1 count of burglary that he's been charged with. I think the question on everyone's mind is he going to make a statement, and what is he going to say? And so that's questions that I certainly share as well, and will be interested to hear and see whether or not he does give a statement on what his motivation for, taking these 4 lives away and cutting them down in their youth really was. So,
Tara Malik is a superstar. One of the things that's bummed me out, now I don't get to meet her in person in Boise, but who knows? Maybe I'll go out for the hearing, the real hearing. There is a hearing to basically get this plea in motion on Wednesday. We'll be taking that live at 11 a.m., I believe, Eastern time, 9 local. But Tara, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joel.
Take care. So, Sky, let me just go to you. Some people are vehemently opposed to the death penalty. You heard Howard Bloom say he's a liberal from New York, not really into it, but if there's ever a case, this is the case. I mean, how strong a bargaining chip is the death penalty? Is it the ultimate bargaining chip? If it wasn't for death here, do you think Kohberger would ever agree to a plea?
Probably not, no. I think it is the ultimate bargaining chip. I think if you work on these cases and defend these cases, really yes, you're defending your client, defending the facts, and hoping you can get a jury to see things your way for a not guilty verdict. But at the end of the day, really what it is you're trying to save your client's life. Like that's the end all be all in these cases, is getting the death penalty taken off the table, or getting a jury verdict that's life without parole. That's really kind of the driving factor. And so I think we all, when you work on these cases, that's exactly what you're trying to do, is avoid death at all ethical costs.
Again, if you're joining us at this late hour, Bryan Kohberger is getting set to take a plea deal in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students who were killed in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. Bryan Kohberger is accused of the crimes, and now he says, listen, I'll take 4 life sentences and go to prison with life without parole in exchange for not being put to death. It is not inked in stone yet. Aaron, Greg, let me go to you. Is it too late? Can the government turn around now and say, you know what, never mind. We talked to these families. 2 of them are furious. We're not going to we're not going to offer a plea deal. We're going to go to trial. Do they still have the wiggle room now that this is out in the public?
I mean, the short answer is yes, but the more correct answer, I think, Joel, is that they've had that conversation. That ship has sailed. Those families are on board. We would never be here if those conversations hadn't taken place. And frankly,
but Greg, I just want to jump in because I know you weren't here, and 2 of the families are livid. The Goncalves family and the Kernodle family. They're saying that they weren't really asked about it. The Kernodles said that they were told one thing and another thing happened, and the Goncalves family is saying that they were never consulted on this. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think the law requires, at least in most states, that they at least be consulted. But ultimately, Joel, it doesn't change my answer, because the state has the right to make the decision. They do what they think is best under the circumstances, and they like to have input from victims, and they don't want victims complaining, but they would have their input. So I am a little surprised if there are some families that are upset about this, that the state hadn't cleared that before we got to this point. But it maybe this was one of those things that happened at the last minute. It was fast and things were moving quickly, and they just had to make a decision. But it is almost unheard of that the state wouldn't consult victims' families on a case like this before you got here. But there was something going on that maybe we'll never know about.
Yeah. COE, we're gonna, the great Fil Waters has entered the conversation. Phil, for those who do not know, Phil's on the Friday show. He's investigated over 400 homicides. Fil Waters, you refer to this guy as the evil doer. A lot of people think he fashioned himself after Ted Bundy. And here he is basically crying, no mas, no mas. I don't want the firing squad. Let me cut a deal. Your reaction to it? Phil. Yeah.
Well, I have a little bit of a hard time. I think it's on my side, perhaps, with the connection. Can you hear me?
Yep, we've got you loud and clear. I'm going to bounce Phil out for a minute, and he did the old ear, hand to the ear. But, Greg, let me come back to you. The COE will sort out. Phil, there was a weird audio glitch on there. But, Greg, you've been doing this for over 40 years. You've seen just about everything. These families are, and I don't want to minimize it in any way, very emotional, and rightfully so. You act as a representative of the Richens family, the guy who is allegedly murdered by being given 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl by Corey Richens. That's still an active case. But if you were a part of this case representing the families, what would you be saying to them right now?
Well, I would say that I would try to give them some solace, Joel, and say, look, life in prison for 4 homicides means natural life. He's never going to get out. And no matter what you feel and think about the death penalty, there's always something that could happen down the road. So you should feel comfortable, I would say, to the families, that he will never walk the streets again. He will never be part of society in any meaningful way. he will be in prison and he will die in prison. And I know that seems harsh, but if they're thinking he deserved the death penalty, and like some people have said on the show, 4 homicides, if there's ever a case for the death penalty, this is probably it. But this puts the case to bed. It puts it to rest. And there's something in that for victims, because victims don't like to be thinking, okay, we've got this parole hearing coming up in 10 years, or we've got this appeal coming up in 5 years, or we've got, the 10th Circuit's weighing in on, or the 9th Circuit, I guess, in Idaho is weighing in on whether or not, this case was done fairly and accurately. And I mean, I've dealt with victims for most of my career. Sometimes the victims that I dealt with for 20 years are still people I'm dealing with. And there's some way you can convince them. And I think that they will feel better in the years to come, knowing that he's never, ever, ever going to be out.
Yeah. Thank you to Carmel McParland for a super chat there. Fil Waters has investigated over 400 homicides. Phil, you able to hear me? The guy's on the Big Island, so it takes longer for the audio to travel. And there goes his Wi-Fi. He's on the Big Island in Hawaii, and his Wi-Fi occasionally has issues, which today is not a good day for that to happen, but life happens. So there you go. Aaron, to you, one of the other things, we'll go for a few more minutes here. Amazon is still set to come out with a docuseries where they're going to kind of highlight, and will likely still highlight, the families. And this is being done, I think, sort of in concert or in conjunction with James Patterson, the famous thriller writers, with his book on this case. And I'm just wondering, there was enough sort of, I don't want to say outrage, but there was so much public discussion just about this one Dateline episode where we headed in a direction that was treading, I guess, on thin ice with all the reports in the media. Obviously, there's a gag order in place. Judge Hippler had begun to investigate what was going on, who gave Dateline what. But now with this Amazon series coming out, you think that played any factor at all, just the intense scrutiny that this was getting?
I don't think so. I guess for myself as a prosecutor, I don't think it would have that much of an impact. What I will tell you is that it was going to make jury selection just an absolute circus all of its own. So, I mean, you would have to, the size of your panel that you would have to pull in just to try to seat, probably 15, well, gosh, it was going to be a 3-month trial. So depending on how many alternates they were going to do, they'd be seating probably 16, 17 people that they would need to get. And they need to be people who don't know anything about the case, or don't have any opinions one way or another on Kohberger's innocence or guilt. So, I mean, that's really the impact, because you're looking for the people who just really don't know much about it. Like maybe they heard a name, maybe they heard some college students got killed. I mean, that's kind of the best you could hope for in a case this high profile, where there's been a 2020, there's been Datelines, and now this Amazon Prime series. That's kind of the best that you could hope for, is just somebody who maybe heard about the crime but hasn't been tracking it at all. But that's the real difficulty, is just seating the jury. The trial stays the same, the evidence stays the same. It's just sitting a jury that would be a really challenging feat.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, you're looking at the Sean Diddy Combs trial. There was a question early on today that one of the jurors, they're in deliberations, one of the jurors, according to the other jurors, wasn't following instructions. And so you just never know. My concern with that case is that there was going to be jury nullification, because the guy's a huge hip hop star. Is there a stealth ban on the jury? It seems like they're running into some issues early on. Someone is saying it is juror 25. I'm not 100% sure about that. But Len Ver, back to you, the man that knows everything about prisons. I cannot think outside of a gun being pointed at me and then being fired. And that might be the less painless scenario here. But this guy, who is basically a coward, he is going to now be walked into a state prison. You said he's going to be in max custody environment. Paint that picture for us. Where does he live now once he gets to state prison, assuming the plea deal happens? Who is he surrounded by? How much yard time does he get? What is his life going to look? We're going to do a whole show on this, but give us a sneak peek at his future existence in an Idaho state prison.
So before saying that, let me just paint the picture of what possibly death row would have looked like had he been, tried for this, and then he ended up on death row. I've done some death row defense work on behalf of attorneys who are trying to prevent their clients from being sentenced to death. The cases that I've looked at, these people are dealing with a lot of childhood trauma. They're dealing with a lot of abuse as they were growing up, special circumstances, which can explain, where things might have gone off the tracks. This individual had it all. I mean, you're talking about a person who's highly educated, getting his PhD, and does something that is just very, very abnormal comparing to the people that I've looked at on death row. What I found on death row was it is a lot easier to be on death row than to be on some of these maximum custody prison units. And the reason for that is because they're on death row, their appeals and they're fighting for their lives, they're afforded a lot more, access to such things as law libraries, and they have access to research, and they have access to attorneys and legal interns that come in to assist them with their cases. I found that when I walked into a death row in the state of Nevada, there were, dozens of people there. They were all out in the day room. They had open unit. They had access to getting canteen. They had access to, a typewriter or a word processor, whatever you might call it. They had a lot more access on death row, and that access continued for years and years. And they didn't fight with each other because they had pretty much a good thing going on death row. Now compare that to the max custody unit. I thought that was, and I've been to max custody prisons in multiple states. A max custody or a location where this individual will end up in is probably the worst place that you could place somebody. It's even better. Death row is even better. That's at least my observation from personally seeing it. In the max custody facility, he will be allowed out about 1 hour a day. He won't have any physical contact. In most states, they won't have any physical contact with another human being for years. Like, the nurse may come in and take his vitals, and that might be the only time that someone will physically touch him, short of corrections officers placing handcuffs on him and leg irons on him and moving him from place to place. He will not come out of the cell unless he is in restraints, most likely because he's a max custody individual that has committed, horrible crimes. He's going to be in full restraints, which is, belly chains, leg shackles, all of that. Anytime you move him, that's how restrictive it will be. Most likely there'll be 2 to 3 officers anywhere that he goes. Everything is going to be restricted. His mail's going to be, people are going to screen those kinds of things. Everything that he has in his cell is going to be restricted. Compare that to death row. They have a lot more materials that they have access to than somebody on max custody in his situation. The other thing that I would say that there was some comments about him having autism. There might be some issues. Usually when someone gets sentenced to life in prison, they might become suicidal. There might be, mental health related issues, and all of that will just sort of keep him separate, away from the general population. Now that scenario is going to continue for years, possibly 2 decades before he can be out in an area where he might be around other inmates. So that's typically what his life's going to be like.
I'm going to come back with some follow-ups there. If you guys are new to Surviving the Survivor, there are a lot of new people in here. We do a live nightly panel show on the biggest cases criminal cases in America and elsewhere. And I'll put my money against anyone. This is the best panel you're going to see anywhere on traditional media or YouTube. The guests that we've had coming in and out. If you can find a better group, email me, survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com, and I will give you your money back, even though you didn't pay, or I'll send you a shirt or something. But you got to make the case as to where you saw a better group of guests, because the answer is nowhere. And now we got Fil Waters coming to us from the Big Island of Hawaii. Fil is a legendary Houston homicide detective, America's most respected detective, investigated over 400 homicides. Fil, I know you had a triple homicide at one point in your career. This is a quadruple. This is as bad as it gets. Your reaction to this guy you refer to as the evildoer, now apparently a coward, saying, I don't want any part of the death penalty. Give me 4 life sentences.
Well, it's good to be with you. I tell you what, I was surprised that the prosecution offered the plea, but I was not surprised at all that the defense took it. So, I'm a, I listened to the commentary here with Leonard, and with all due respect, the general discussion about death row, and it's easier for guys on death row than it is on in maximum security population, that kind of thing. To me, those arguments, that's a nice discussion about the topic, but in reality, I'm a proponent of the death penalty. I put 9 people on death row in the state of Texas. 2 of them are cop killers. 4 of them have been rehabilitated. I use that term because execution is just a very harsh term. So in this particular case, I have said from the beginning that I've always let evidence lead me where I need to be. And I've never taken it some direction I wanted it to go. It's always a journey for the truth. And from the very beginning of this case, and I think, Joel, this was the case that brought us all together.
Yes, sir.
And I as typical with my commentary, I do not refer to these people that have committed these acts by their names. I don't want to give them any recognition. So this one I dubbed the evildoer, and I'll stick with that. In this particular case, the evidence at the very beginning of this thing began to lead us directly to him. All roads led to him, and it was profound. When we got to the point where he was charged and indicted, and he was in custody and awaiting, and the prosecution's putting their case together, he gets his defense attorneys and so forth and so on. It was interesting to watch the jockeying by the defense attorneys trying to get evidence suppressed, and which is what they're supposed to do. I'm not saying that they're not supposed to do that, but it was interesting to watch it take place and unfold. And they were doing everything that I have seen defense attorneys do over the 23-year career that I had at HPD Homicide. So nothing that I saw happening in this particular case was out of the ordinary in terms of when we got to the point where it's going to be prosecuted. And the prosecution has been building a better case over the period of time since the arrest. And that's what always happens. The case gets better. Once you've got the person arrested, the case gets better. And that's what happened in this particular case. It got better over time. And I think the defense, good grief. I mean, I appreciate their efforts, and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But the evidence has become insurmountable. So I'm not surprised at all that they used, I think that Joel, you had talked about is the death penalty used as some sort of a bargaining chip. And of course it is. Of course it is. And so those prosecutors, that it's a tough decision to do that, especially in a case like this. I am surprised because the families of these young people that were slaughtered by this evildoer, I know there had to have been discussions with them about this is what we are being proposed to do, is give a plea, propose a plea. And Now, I've been in these discussions. In my view, if there's one family member that says we're not for it, then they need to proceed with the prosecution of the case. I read what they talked about justifying it, that they don't have to put the families through the trial and so forth and so on. But I'm going to tell you, my experience has been, Joel, you mentioned the triple homicide that I had.
Yep.
And I can tell you that the family, who I became very close with, they were very, very disappointed that the prosecution decided, and this strictly had to do with philosophical differences in the DA's office, did not pursue the death penalty in that case. It was a lay down death penalty case, and they were angry about the fact that they didn't go forward with the death penalty prosecution. So again, I'm a little surprised about the prosecution doing this, because they have fought so hard to keep it on the table. In terms of if he gets the plea, he's going to be in he's going to be in prison for the rest of his life, and the guys on death row are better off. Well, I don't know what death rows, Leonard, you have visited where all those people on death row are having a happy life. I've been to death row in Texas, and I can tell you those guys are not living a happy life.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you in Texas.
Yeah. So it's too bad the rest of the country didn't feel that same way. But,
Phil, by the way, Phil, what is death row like in Texas? Take us, give us a feel for that.
Well, they're isolated in their little separate cells. They don't have any interaction physically with anybody except the people that are feeding them. They can holler between each other, and they get 1 hour a day in a kind of a day room set, and that's it. And look, trying to voice some sort of sympathy for these guys. Look, these guys put themselves there. They made a decision to put themselves there. And the evidence showed and gave the jury the opportunity to serve a measure of justice. Now, look, death penalty cases, and in my experience, the death penalty is reserved for the most egregious cases. And you don't just throw the death penalty around haphazardly. But once that is the thing, that we've got a pretty quick appellate process in Texas. It was at the state level for the death penalty. So executions take place a little quicker. I was reading, I forget what state it was in, but there was some guy that was just recently executed after he's been sitting on death row for 50 freaking years. That's the tragedy here. That's the wrong thing happening here. And because I've sat with families that have had family members removed from their families by the most violent acts. And I'm sorry, I don't have any empathy or sympathy for guys that have earned their way to death row. And I don't think the argument about, okay, well, it's going to be a lot harder for them if they're living in this maximum prison and they're having to do this and that. Well, in my view, and no disrespect to anybody, I'm just talking about my view, that's a bunch of bull crap. It's black and white for me. If you earn the right to get on death row, then you deserve the right to be executed on death row. So I'm a little, and I think you said it, Joel, in this particular case, the evildoer, he's the poster child for the death penalty.
Yeah. Phil can only speak the way Phil does, which is very honestly and passionately. He has a great voice. That's why I call him Uncle Phil. He's like everybody's uncle. Greg is thinking you got to love Phil. Cynthia Sweezy says you don't mess with Phil. But Sky Lazaro, you don't mess with her either. She's got to run. What can I say about Sky? She loves horses. She loves dogs. She's an amazing criminal defense
attorney. That's a good thing, Sky.
Yeah. Sky is awesome.
I got horses in Texas, Phil.
Oh, there you go.
I've got horses here in Hawaii.
We'll all take a field trip to the Big Island. Phil is the real life Magnum PI. Guy drives not one but two Ferraris, and he splits time between the Big Island and Houston. And he wears the old Tom Selleck Detroit Tigers baseball cap. So you got the real life. Magnum PI wishes he was Fil Waters. But Sky Lazaro, your final thoughts as we bid you adieu. And thank you so much for being here. You've been here along with Aaron the entire time, which is 2 hours, 9 minutes, and 3 seconds. Go ahead, Scott.
I think this is the right resolution for everybody involved. I respect Phil's decision, thoughts on the death penalty. And I do agree with you. It should be reserved for the most egregious of cases, which this probably qualifies as. That being said, resolving these cases, I think because we don't execute people near as quickly out here as they do in Texas or Florida, I do think this gives some finality to this where there's no possibility of appeal, and hopefully lets these people heal and think about their loved ones instead of whatever litigation is going on as it relates to Mr. Kohberger. So with that, I give my best to the families and everyone involved.
Very nice. Sky, thanks so much. We really appreciate you more than you know, and I'll hit you up soon. We'll get you back on.
Great. Good to see y'all.
Thank you. So Greg Skordas, let me come to you. And Aaron, I know you've been here a long time. I really appreciate it. But Greg, the Daily Mail is now reporting, and I'm going to read this, that prosecutors claimed they met with relatives of the victims who were, quote unquote, available and, quote unquote, weighed the right path forward and made a formal offer. In the letter, prosecutors wrote, "This resolution," this is a direct quote here, "this resolution is our sincere attempt to seek justice for your family. This agreement ensures that the defendant will be convicted, will spend the rest of his life in prison, and will not be able to put you and the other families through the uncertainty of decades of post-conviction appeals. Your viewpoints weighed heavily in our decision-making process, and we hope that you may come to appreciate why we believe this resolution is in the best interest of justice." So, Greg, your take on that, and let me just add the caveat that I'm looking at the cesspool that is X right now, and there are people literally calling for Bill Thompson's head because everyone's insane these days. But I literally saw someone on X, more than one, saying that he deserves the death penalty for this decision, which is absolutely crazy. Those people are insane. There's a lot of insane people in this world, but particularly on X. But Greg Skordas, your reaction to hearing this, the problem I have with this, I'll tell you, is they say that they spoke to the families that were, quote unquote, available. In a case like this, I think you have to make everyone available or wait until they're available. Your thoughts? And you got to unmute yourself, Greg.
Sound like my wife. I think that I would assume that they have been in touch with the families, and it's no excuse that hey, we called and the phone didn't pick up, or the line was busy, or something like that. I mean, you've got to make every effort possible to get in touch with the families. But I will also say this, Joel, with all respect to the other panelists here, the state has to make the decision. They have to live with the decision, and they have to do what they think is best under the circumstances, given the strength and the weakness of their case. Kohberger is by all accounts a very evil person. 4 homicides is as bad as it gets. But at the end of the day, we had a case here in Utah right now. We're dealing with it right now. The guy's been on death row for 40-some years, and they found out that the prosecutor withheld evidence. Had he pled guilty 40 years ago, we wouldn't be having that discussion, and he'd be spending the rest of his life in prison. As it is, they're going to have to retry the case. In a death penalty case, Phil, you know this. The appeals never end. The work of the defense attorneys never ends. The writs of habeas corpus never end. And the chance of a court looking at it sometime 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, it never ceases to happen either. And there's always that chance. There's no chance now if he enters a plea. There's no chance that anything will happen other than he will serve the rest of his life in prison, because there's nothing to appeal except the competency of his attorney. And I'm sure that they've gone through that to a fare thee well before they enter the plea here in a day or two, to make sure that he absolutely understands what he's doing. So the finality of it is worth something, I think, to a lot of people. Obviously, that's maybe not the retribution that the victims' families felt they deserved. and it probably isn't what they deserved. But the state of Idaho, they know more about their case than any of us do, and they made this decision, and they're going to live with it, and they're going to live with the backlash that some of the people on this very call are dealing with right now, or expressing, I should say, and they will for a long time. But I've been in both shoes, the prosecution, defense, and you just have to make these tough decisions, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of your case.
Yeah, and Greg, you're saying that the only thing he could potentially appeal is the competency of his attorney. If he does agree to this deal, is that taken off the table as well? Is there anything he can appeal that he can appeal to, or nothing at all?
That's not taken off the table, because if that comes down the road, they find out that there was a witness they could have interviewed, or this or that. I mean, that's not off the table. It could be under Idaho law if he doesn't raise it within some period of time, a year or two or something like that. They have writs, and they have ineffective assistance of counsel claims that have to be raised by a certain period of time. But no, that's not off the table. Now, by all accounts, he had a very, very skilled lawyer, a very good lawyer, who's filed a lot of motions and has done a lot to preserve this case and to get it ready for trial. So I think he would have a rough argument to make that, hey, I didn't have good representation. But you can waive just about anything when you enter a plea in America, but waiving the competency of your own attorney is not something that courts will usually allow you to do.
Very eloquently stated there. A few more things, and then we will begin to wrap this monstrous 2-hour and 15-minute show up. If you're just joining us, Bryan Kohberger is set to take a plea deal in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students who were tragically killed in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. Before we go, I want to ask Phil about the amazing police work and a few more questions. But Aaron, to you, this came up much earlier in this show. Inky Pinky in the chat, love the name, was asking, reminds me of Pinky Tuscadero from Happy Days, A Blast from the Past. I'm now delirious this far in, but the question of sealed evidence now being opened, are we going to get a glimpse into anything now? Some of the evidence apparently is going to be off limits, but is anything going to be made public now? So the conspiracy theorists out there, the others who just want to see it, that their minds are settled.
Well, I think that that a lot of the, they seal minor cases, but they usually don't seal adult cases. So I think that this one had more to do with the high profile nature of it, and the fact that there were 2020s dropping and datelines and everything like that, which was just making it was frankly, everybody who was actually working the case, it was making everybody's lives that much harder. So I think that that's why things were sealed, because it's a salacious case. It's, and I think that there was just such a high appetite for it that's why they were trying to really kind of control the dissemination of that information. Once this is all said and done and the plea deal is signed and he's sentenced, I think that there's a good chance that a lot of that would be unsealed, because typically this is not the kind of thing that, that would be protected if it was a minor. I just wanted to say too, just because I know that I've been reading the comments kind of as we go along, we kind of keep going back and forth. I just wanted to really quickly, this is from the Idaho Victims Rights Act. It says that that victims need to be afforded the opportunity to communicate with the prosecution, and they need to be advised of any proposed plea agreement by the prosecuting attorney prior to entering into a plea agreement. And I just want to say that because so many of the word that I keep seeing in the chat is consulted. Did they consult? Prosecutors don't have to consult with the family to decide what to do. They have to, and that's kind of the point that I've been making, is that there's a lot of moving pieces to this. And if 6 of one, half dozen of the other, you think you could end up exactly where you are without putting the family through the trial, and you think there's a decent chance that the jury doesn't sentence them to death in the penalty phase, then why go through all of the pain and trauma and suffering of putting the family through the trial? And especially if you've got half of your victims who are saying, I just need this over. And we just don't know, because we haven't heard from the other ones yet, but prosecutors don't have to consult the family. I mean, I took it very seriously when I had these conversations, and 99% of the time, I had the victims understanding and with me and in agreement before I ever did a plea deal, because it was important to me. They're the victim of a crime, and that's justice, right? That's our whole, as prosecutor, that was what I loved about it, was that I actually felt like I did justice. But the fact is that it still is the prosecutor's case, and they don't represent the victims. They are important, and we do what we do because we feel a strong sense of justice and we want justice for them. But that doesn't mean that you can let them completely control a case. And just like when Sky and Tara were on earlier, they kind of agreed that, and I feel like Greg would agree with this too, because he's been on both sides of this. I've done a lot of jury trials, but I can tell you that I had cases where I thought I had all the evidence, and juries can get hung up on some weird small thing. And Phil agrees with me too. You've seen enough of them. And I've talked to juries afterwards and just scratched my head over what it was that, and you got to remember, there's 12 people, they're in a room together. One person brings it up, and all of a sudden 11 people who weren't hung up on that now are kind of going, oh, and sometimes it's not even a correct assessment of the evidence, but it doesn't matter if you get a not guilty. So that's what I would say. I think that, it's such a tragedy and nothing is going to bring them back. And I hope that the families do sort of make peace with this plea agreement, because as somebody who was notoriously, I was called the dragon lady and the pit bull and everything as a prosecutor, I was never afraid to go to trial and I would fight for everything. But I do think that this is a deal that I would have made, and I never backed away from a fight unless I really thought it was the best thing for everybody. And this alleviates all the risk, and it puts it to bed without years of appeals. Anyway, but I wanted to get those last few thoughts in because I am also going to cut out.
Erin is a defense attorney out of Pocatello, Idaho. Erin, thank you so much.
I was
Idaho.
I was a prosecutor.
Prosecutor. Okay, there you go, prosecutor. Erin, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks. By the way, Cindy Hollenbeck's in the chat. She lived in Moscow and now lives in Pullman, which is where the evildoer, as Phil says, was doing his PhD. And I want to do a show with them as well. We've had her on before. How is the community reacting to this? So we'll get that done. A few more questions. I'm going to rile Phil up in just a second, but before we get there with a question, Len Ver, listen, I don't wish death on anyone. Fil Waters is a very religious man. However, there are certain instances, and if he serves life, he serves life, but he nevertheless will be a target. And you were talking about basically his lack of movement that he's going to have within a state prison. He's going to be shackled. The only time he'll ever have human contact is with a nurse. If someone was going to target him or try to take him out, where in the prison would there be a gap or a possibility for this to happen? Or do they pay off guards? Because you always hear these high profile inmates being green lighted or green lit. Where, if someone wanted to get to him, where would they do this?
Yeah, I don't believe that it's going to be possible for the first few years, because he will be isolated in a single cell with zero access to others. If he was charged with a new crime, for example, and he ended up having to go to trial, and he was in a county jail waiting for court or something like that happen, because I've seen that kind of stuff happens. People on death row will murder other people sometimes and then end up going to trial, and then they're sitting in a county jail or being moved through a county jail facility so that they can go through the trial. I mean, that could be maybe a location where it could be a possible area to worry about for him, or a hospital setting. Some kind of a mental health treatment setting. Those are the types of places where you might find places or avenues where if somebody wanted to target him, those would be the areas. For the first several years, he is not going to be accessible to people. And that's just generally the way things work. And to talk about Phil's point earlier, I've seen enough people on death row that die of natural causes and old age that in many states, the death penalty is simply not effective because of the appeals process and the decades it takes for somebody to, I mean, by the time you get to them, the person's, 75 years old and they committed a crime when they were in their 20s. And even the families and the victims, they're no longer around. And so because it takes so long, I think in this case, I don't know what the Idaho rules are, but if Idaho is a state where it takes 30, 40 years to actually get through the process, as opposed to Texas, which is very quick. I live in Texas, and I understand how things move rapidly here. And that may be the deciding factor.
Greg Scortis, Stefania is asking this over and again, and it's a good question. Can they compel, or does, and we went over this earlier in the show, I believe the answer is no, but can the government compel, as part of the deal, can they compel Bryan Kohberger to give a confession, to explain what happened, why he did it, motive?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of two questions there. A confession, he absolutely is going to have to say, I'm guilty. That this government's going to say, here are the facts of the case. He, on or about such and such a date in this town, he caused the death of these 4 people under these circumstances. And the judge will say, Mr. Kohberger, is that what happened? And he'll have to say yes. So he will give a confession to that extent. Motive, that's a different animal that we may never learn. That's something that is in the court of law. It's not relevant anyway, but in the court of public opinion, yeah, we all want to know what was going on. He may do that, although he's such a creep show. I wouldn't believe a word he said anyway. If he did give you some idea of what his motive was or what he was trying to do, and maybe he'll think he can write a book or get some attention or something like that. The confession is the word guilty 4 times. And the public will get that, and the victims will get that, and he'll have to acknowledge every element of the crime, and that he did it, and that he knowingly and intentionally did it, and that's the confession that they'll get. So I know I haven't answered your question. I've danced around it a little bit.
No, but you answered it. But we will hear him say, the judge will say, blah 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 blah. Are you guilty? And he'll have to say, yes, Your Honor. Does he have to actually say the word, yes, I am guilty? Does he have to?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
Very fascinating. Fil Waters, you're the investigator. We all remember in the early days, everyone was ripping apart Moscow PD, small time, Keystone cops. They did a pretty good job. The evidence was overwhelming. I believe it was 7 weeks before they got their guy. Before I rile you up with a question, which I can't wait to do, your thoughts on the investigation overall, how airtight is it?
Well, I think we're seeing the results of it, right? I mean, the early on, these people that live in a freaking fast food world and think that this stuff should have been solved in 43 minutes with no commercials. What a bunch of idiots. In the real world, the chief there, I tell you what, that chief showed such grace to those reporters and all those critics and all those haters. He stayed the course. He did the first thing that needed to be done in a department that size. He called in for support. So he brought in the state. I think the FBI got involved in it. So he brought in the resources that he knew he needed to keep this investigation on track and to keep it with integrity, being conducted with integrity. And that's what happened. And so you have this working of the scene, the evidence that was gathered, and so forth and so on. So in terms of what the detectives did, what the agents did, kudos to them. And I said it at the time. When they finally got to the point where they could arrest this evildoer, I said, here you go. Here's what I've been telling everybody to wait for. Wait for it. Because they're not going to screw this thing up. This case is it's got so many moving parts in it. And so then you get the conspiracy theories, that crap that started at the beginning of it. You're going to get them now anyway. I mean, it's just the nature of people.
Phil, you just ruined my my riling up of you, because that's my question. So In
Oh.
this very chat, we have people earlier saying they're forcing him into this. He didn't do it. I would like you, as the patriarch of this show, I mean, what do you say to these? We're seeing it pop up all over, these conspiracy theories that are just absolutely implausible. What do you say to these people?
Well, with the I don't know. Well, I guess I can use the term that I've already used. You know, I mean, the technical term we would call these people are idiots. I mean, they're just they are people with an agenda, and to see these conspiracies all around everywhere. I mean, just follow the evidence, for crying out loud. I mean, that's what I did for 23 years. I followed the evidence, and it's going to take. And I've been in investigations that evidence was leading me one direction, and then when I uncovered a part of evidence that I went, wow, this was not going the way I thought it was going to go. It took a turn and led me in the right direction. So, you know, again, if you're not looking at the evidence, or if you're taking pieces of evidence, trying to spin something off of them, then you're not looking at the totality of the case and the investigation. So, and those are people, I guess, that have watched enough of Dateline or 48 Hours and so forth that they all of a sudden they're homicide detectives and they've got this thing all figured out, and then they become prosecutors. So, they're going to be around. Those folks are going to be around. The thing that bothers me about these people is they have no consideration or empathy for the families of the victims when they do this crap. And that is what is most disturbing to me. Their yammerings I could care less about, but the way it affects these families, that is just, it's unconscionable, and I think it's unforgivable.
Look at this. Don't take the bait, the conspiracy theorists. I'm not, but sometimes they win over. We're going to get a final question and final thoughts right now. Len Ver, we've been going for 2 hours and 31 minutes. If you're just tuning in, Bryan Kohberger accused in the horrific quadruple murders of 4 University of Idaho students. He is set to take a plea deal, 4 life sentences. He's got to say guilty to all 4. You just heard Greg Skorda say that. And in return, he will not be put to death, which was on the table. Len Ver has been in the corrections system in Nevada and elsewhere for many years, serving as a warden. Len Ver, you're not a criminal profiler, but you've been around enough criminals to understand the criminal mind. A lot of people are saying that Bryan Kohberger might be getting off on this because he's still sort of controlling the narrative. He had the defense go to the government and ask for this plea deal. He's pulling the so-called strings. Do you buy that? And do me a favor, because I'm interested in this. Once you answer that, walk us through his first, when he's remanded to the state prison, what is his first day going to look like? But let's start with the first question first. Is he controlling the narrative?
Yeah, I think I've worked with enough people in custody that have killed multiple people. There's a sociopathic element to this that, these people are highly intelligent. They're very calculating, very manipulative. I've had to warn my staff and train my staff to always be on guard. These people can get in your head and sort of control the narrative, at least in person. They can do that. And yes, I mean, I would be very wary of who this person is and how he controls the narrative. And once he's in prison, how he tries to manipulate staff and everything else around him, because I think he's a highly intelligent sociopathic personality. Not saying it from a clinical perspective, because I don't have the background to say that, but I've worked with enough people to say that that's most likely where we're going to find, his makeup is that. So having said that, I think he's going to try to control every situation from the time that he's in jail to the time that he's in prison, to what occurs in prison, who he meets, who he gives interviews to, whether or not he tries to get somebody to author a book for him, and then, try to get into those kinds of book deals and stay relevant. I think those are the types of behaviors that I would be wary about. And, once he's in prison, I think the government agency that is controlling him should be really careful that this doesn't become a celebrity show around this person. And I'm with Phil. I don't want to even use his name, but you don't want to turn this into a celebrity show where, he gets not only 15 minutes of fame, it's 15 years of fame. I mean, we were talking about Charlie Manson for decades, right? I mean, it's just the type of sociopathic personality that sort of gets into the public image, and all of a sudden people want to know more, and there's this thirst to get more. And I would be really worried about that kind of a personality. Now, that said, when he goes to prison, he's going to go through the same process that everyone goes through, which is they're going to do an intake assessment. They're going to check and see if he's got mental health issues. The thing that I'm surprised that he didn't try to do, that he was incompetent to stand trial and then tried to sort of spin this thing out for another 2-3 years while he regained competency. I've seen those kinds of things occur too. But he goes in, he's going to get a screening done. They're going to decide if he's suicidal or not. He'll be strip searched. They're going to give him a physical at some point. They're going to check his blood, check for, whatever illnesses and whatnot. And then they're going to put him in, prison clothing, give him the rules, give him the orientation. He's going to meet somebody from classification who's going to tell him, look, for the next so many years, you're going to be in this kind of a location. But, those classification things occur, fairly frequently, about every 90 days, every 6 months. Someone's going to meet with him to tell him, you're going to continue to stay here. So at some point, he's going to sign up for getting his telephone so he can talk to his family. Again, those are things, as much as we might have a punishment and a punitive mindset, those are things that he will get access to whether we want to or not. He's going to be able to talk to, people that want to talk to him, his family members, for example. And then at some point, there will be some visits. Most likely it would be through video because of the high security nature of it. But generally, that would be the first part of what happens to him.
Yeah, it is going to be a dark future for that guy in a state prison, but it's what he deserves if he admits to these crimes. Huge thanks to Len Ver. Greg Skordas, one of the people that has to be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that we never give these guys credit is Judge Stephen Hippler, the man sitting on the bench. He's got to be saying to himself, I don't have to sit here for a 3-month trial now and deal with all the headaches. What do you think's going on in his mind, and your final thoughts?
Exactly that, Joel. That he was thinking he had to clear his docket for 3 months. On the other hand, judges like that. I mean, you look at people like this panel, Phil and Leonard, and you think these guys do their job because they love it, and they do a good job. You can tell the passion in both of them. This judge is probably the same way. He wanted to do this trial, but at the end of the day, I believe in the system. I believe that it probably worked in this case, that good lawyers, a good judge got together, and although the judge wasn't part of the plea negotiations, he's been ruling on issues that brought them to where they are today. So I think this is probably a very, very good resolution.
Len, there's questions that people are asking. I got to ask you very quickly. Will he have either a tablet, and he's said to be a vegan? Will the prison have to accommodate his veganism? By the way, Phil is a vegan as well. Phil only eats pistachio meat, chicken that is pistachio based. But go ahead, Len Ver. Will he have a tablet? Will he be able to keep his vegan diet?
Depending on the prison system, there are some prisons where they use the tablets for video visitation. And so that's something that they do. Then possibly He could have access to, technology that allows for video visitation. So if he needs to talk to his attorney or whatnot, that may be the way they do that. If he is a vegan, there are lots of diets in prisons. There's halal diets, kosher diets, high cholesterol diets, diabetic diets. I mean, you name it. There's all kinds of diets, and they find ways to sort of get those approved, whether it's medically approved. Usually that's where it becomes an issue that's a health related issue because someone's got diabetes or high cholesterol and the doctor says give them whatever the health appropriate diet is. Veganism is a choice as far as I can tell. And it's not a medically required thing. Unless it becomes a medically required thing, I don't believe the state has to comply.
There you go. COE
so much simpler when it was just bologna sandwiches, right, Len?
Now it's got to be pistachio-based bologna. The COE, big thanks to everyone for being here for what turned into a nearly 3-hour show. We're 2 hours, 39 minutes, and 54 seconds. Who's counting? And 2 back-to-back days of breaking news. Our thoughts are going out to the families of those firefighters in North Idaho. So it's been a long couple of days for the great people of the great state of Idaho. If you don't know Fil Waters, he is America's most respected detective. He has investigated over 400 homicides with a ridiculous clearance and criminal confession rate, both way higher than anyone else you know. Phil, as the wise uncle of the show, what do you say to the people who are going to and are already saying there are so many unanswered questions? We're never going to get the answers to all these questions. What is your answer to them?
Well, I would agree with them. Unless there was some provision here in the plea deal that he was going to speak to what happened. And as Greg's talked about, we don't need to know that for prosecution, but that's what everybody wants to know, right? Every person I had in the interview room, I mean, I got the elements, I got all the stuff that I needed for that, but it was always the question of why. Why did this happen? And look, jurors want to know why it happened. They don't just want the technical prosecution of the case. They want to know why it happened. And I think Sky, or maybe it was Aaron that alluded to it, you never know what a jury's going to do. That's the whole problem with this kind of a process. And to talk about Greg's point here, where the prosecutors have to weigh this. And I have been in those discussions now. I tell you what, I stood on desks in DA's offices saying this needs to be prosecuted as a death penalty case, and they have not done it. So, and I understood it. I understood it, but I didn't like it. But again, they're the ones that have to present it, and they have to balance the weight of the evidence against what their strategy is, and how is it going to play to a jury. And you don't always have the best special witnesses either. So and in this particular case, you saw witnesses continuing to be added, which is an indication that in the ensuing investigation that occurred after the arrest, the case got better. And so that's when we get to this point now where the defense, at least what I'm hearing here, they approach and say, would we consider a plea? Because in these death penalty cases, and I think Greg will agree with me, the job of the defense attorney is to what? It's not a question of guilty or not guilty. It's to save their life. That's the whole purpose of this thing. So when you go into a death penalty case where it's going to be prosecuted as a death penalty case, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to save their life. Because in Texas, if you're prosecuted as a death penalty case and the jury does not find gives you the punishment of the death penalty, then it's automatically life with no parole. So that's what these defense attorneys are trying to do, and that's what they were trying to do in this plea. in regards to, I think Aaron made, I hope I misunderstood her, but I think she said something like, we don't represent the victims. And I would have to just disagree. The prosecutors absolutely represent the victims. I know that they represent the state, but they're in there at the behest of for the families, for these people. I tell you what, I've had many death penalty cases and non-death penalty and tried as non-capital cases, where the prosecutors, they get as emotionally involved in this on that level as anybody. So I think prosecutors, and as they should, I think. I mean, that's the way the prosecutors that I've worked with, that's the attitude that they took. They're fully committed to it and in representing the victims and trying to get the greatest measure of justice for those families. So and the victims. So yeah, it's a tough job no matter which side of this you're on, and especially in a case like this when there's it's so egregious and there's so much emotion involved, and you've got the death of these beautiful young people multiplied 4 times. So if you can imagine one family going through this, now multiply that 4 times. And I don't even think you could even quantify the amount of pain and grief that's gone on with these families. So my prayer for them is that this will close the door. I think maybe Greg talked about that this will close the door on this part of this chapter of their life, and it won't define those young people.
As always, Phil, eloquent in his comments. This is what it's all about, not the evildoer. You're looking at Ethan Chapin, who is a triplet. Now they must go on as just 2. You've got Maddy Mogen, you've got Kaylee Goncalves, you have Xana Kernodle. Ethan and Xana were a couple. It is beyond tragic, and now this evildoer, it appears, if you're just joining us now, is going to accept a plea deal, 4 life sentences instead of receiving potentially the death penalty. Very quick final question, Greg Skordas. Will the families, the victims that this is all about, will they be allowed to offer victim impact statements? In other words, will they be able to speak directly to Bryan Kohberger when he pleads guilty?
They'll be able to do that when he's sentenced, which will be after the plea, but absolutely they have the right to speak. They will be invited to speak, and they'll be speaking to the court, but they'll be speaking to Bryan Kohberger at the same time. Absolutely.
And how long a time from the plea deal hearing to the sentencing part of it, do you think?
I would say something between 30 and 60 days. It won't take long, but they do a pre-sentence report. The probation department will do one, and they'll gather input from the victims' families. They'll do victim impact statements in writing, but they'll also be able to speak at the time of sentencing if that's what they choose to do.
I said it before, I'll say it again. We got the best guests in all of true crime. If anyone can go back and find a show with this caliber of guests for this long on this big a story, email me, survivingthesurvivor@gmail. I'll give you your money back. No questions asked. You got to present a receipt or 2. Huge thanks to Len Vare, former prison warden, Greg Skordas, former public defender and one of the best criminal defense attorneys out there, and Fil Waters, the best homicide detective in all of America. Mother Nature's calling for me. I haven't been able to run to the boys' room after drinking this for 2 hours, 47 minutes, and 41 seconds. We're all a big family, so I thought I would share that at the very end. We are on Diddy Verdict Watch, and once again, it's about these victims here. So think of them tonight, not about the evildoer. Love you, America. We'll be back tomorrow. Stay tuned. You can follow me on Instagram at Surviving Survivor, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Podcast STS. Huge thanks to guests. We will see you mañana.